comments about this report? Okay. Item 5, these are our advisory board reports. And if you see there is with our other reports, we have the advisory committee updates. It ranges from the Superintendent Student Advisory Council, the Teacher Advisory Board, the Board Advisory Committee, which did not meet in January, and then that Parent Advisory Board. Are there any questions?
Are they going to be put back into the weekly updates, our board updates? Because I haven't seen them in the board updates recently. Okay, thank you.
And one area of note here as well with the Parent Advisory Board, this is something Ms. Gallagher reminded us of. Remember, that was one that the board agreed to rotate once those dates are set. And so if we can keep, just keep an eye out whenever we know when those dates will be, then we can figure out who can attend which meeting.
And I've had a meeting with Mr. Omar Reed, who leads that, the PAB, and we're scheduling a date with the PAB in a few weeks.
All right, we are at the board president's report. Just not much of an update, but just to let you all know, before we get to number 1, we are still, I think Dr. Hooker is trying to finalize details for the presenter for our retreat. And so at that point, we'll, once we have a tentative, at least a full agenda, we certainly will send that out. And so that, I think that's the only update there. Okay. Anything else that I maybe?
So as a part of the budget planning, we have to have a rough budget for what the board will use for travel. And so Ms. Palmer asked a couple of weeks ago if, what happened? Okay, Ms. Palmer asked, it's okay, no problem. Ms. Palmer asked a couple of weeks ago if she could get just an estimate of what our travel budget is going to be for the year so that they can incorporate it into their final budget. And it doesn't have to be exact. And to do that, we need to know who wants to go to which conferences. And so there is a Google document in our shared drive. And if you could go in and just fill in which conferences you anticipate going to this year, that will help us, help them kind of draft out what a budget's going to look like. And I think in the past it's been like $20,000 and we don't really spend that or spend it down. So there's flexibility, but just for them to have an idea.
Also, as it relates to the retreat, I think Dr. Anderson sent out a reminder about a document that has our norms. And so we know that is one of the agenda items at our retreat that was asked for, and we collectively agreed that we wanted to just revisit those, but we want to have a focus. And so if there are specific ones that we feel like that we need to pay attention to and revise and things like that, we want to know that because it is a lot of time, tackling all of them. And so be sure if you have any thoughts about which ones we want to, you would like for us to take a look at, to be sure you complete that form. Mentors. Dr. Anderson also sent out an update on our mentors. We've done a little switching around, and so there are some updated pairs, and so it's not really formal. There are just some general expectations that we sort of check in with our mentor, maybe even try to grab lunch or dinner with them, mentors and mentees, before our retreat. And so we will follow up individually with those mentees. The item that's listed here under the board president report, for the past couple of months, we have talked about the request to rename Alps Road Elementary as well as Chase Elementary. And I know that we've received some feedback, and my guess is that you all have probably had many more conversations outside of the emails as well. I did want to share, before we open this up for discussion, where we are now, to give a timeline, is that the nominations were finalized at last month's meeting. There are 3 nominations currently that are on, that are options for the board to take any action on. And those nominations are Killian Burke Elementary, Johnny Burks Elementary, and Johnny L. Burke Elementary, and Betty Holston. And I did want to just share here, you know, in transparency, I have had an opportunity to meet with the LSGTs actually, at Chase as well as Alps. I think I forwarded you all the notes from Chase. I have not received Alps feedback, written feedback, but I do want to share at that meeting, I provided a timeline very similar to what I did at Chase, and people were able to ask questions as well as express their concerns. And meeting with the LSGT, from me attending that meeting, the people that did share their concerns, the main concern was if this is something that needs to be done right now. And so, for instance, like, I think there were a couple of people that felt like maybe naming a library, so perhaps the ask is too big. There were questions that were similar to the Chase LSGT about like what the specific costs would be, as well as there were questions about just wanting to know more about like who is this person. And so I think that is in general the feedback that I received. I will reach out to Dr. James, and Dr. Hooker and I spoke about this before, the importance of speaking with the schools, you know, in addition to other stakeholders in the community. And so as soon as they have those notes available, I will definitely share that information with you so that you can have not a firsthand, but a more direct account that's not filtered through me. And so that is where we are. The floor is open for any discussion, any follow-up questions. Dr. James did invite me to meet with the faculty. I think it's Monday. Their faculty meeting may be Monday, to share what I shared with the LSGT. And she identified a couple of other groups, but we couldn't quite figure out when based on our schedules. Like there's a group of moms there. There was one more group, but our schedules did align with being able to meet with the faculty. From my understanding, there was some conversation as well at the school today with the faculty, but I'll be there next week. I'll also speak with individuals that attend Mr. Denson's town hall. And if there are any questions that people have for me, I'm happy to answer those. I'm no scholar on this. I'm not a historian. I can only share the information that I've gathered that led me to the ask. But I have hopefully encouraged and been very clear with constituents that of the importance of reaching out to their board members, feeling free to reach out to me regardless of where they fall on the issue. So the floor is open for any questions or discussion or observations that you may have so far. Dr. Yeager.
Have we done an assessment of the costs. I've heard a lot about unfunded mandates and that all this cost of changing the name is going to fall to the schools and we're not paying for it. Have we done any assessment or accommodation of that common complaint?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Yeager. We're in the process of researching that. Our communications, PR department is doing it, as well as working with Mr. Gilbert and getting those prices for you. Right.
Mr. Denson?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I appreciate you meeting with the LSGTs, and just wanted to mention to the public that I'll be holding a town hall at the ACC Library next Monday at 6 p.m. Just for being able to gather input and have discussion with the community about this. And I appreciate you, Dr. Gant, for being willing to be there to discuss that too. So thank you.
Just a point of clarity, because this is new information. We can have town halls? I didn't think we could have town halls. Can we have town halls?
So,
I think it's
go
a good
ahead,
sign.
Dr. Hooker.
I mean, I don't know, but I would like clarity, because I think the new members, the last incoming members, me, Dr. Anderson, and I know Ms. Gallagher at one point had questions about that. So can we just have clarity on what we can
And
do?
I'm going to refer that to our attorney, and he'll give you clarification on that.
I don't think there's anything that strictly says you cannot, you know, and I don't know where Cognia stands on that sort of thing. You know, the general principles are you act as a group and not as individuals and that sort of thing. But, you know, from a legal perspective, there's nothing that says, so long as there's not a quorum there that subjects it to as an open meeting, there's nothing that says it's illegal.
Thank you. So at the appropriate time, and I may need to bring this up again at new business, but I would like for us to put that on our agenda to discuss, to get clarity around that. Because if that's something that we're able to do, then that's something that everybody should be afforded the opportunity to do. So I would like for us to put that as new business so that we can get clarity around it, so we can better serve this community. So thank you, Tim, for bringing that to light, if that's something that can be done.
Yeah, and one of the things, so if we go back to, I think it may have been 2 years ago in one of our retreats, remember we discussed norms. And one of the norms that came up was the idea of town halls. And if we would have a chance to complete a norm around the town hall. And I think the consensus at that time was like, well, yeah, we want to do town halls, but we need to be sure they are equal, you know, like that we have, you know, there's some consistency, and that one person is not over here doing this and the other person, you know, is doing a town hall and they don't have access to resources or to the district. And I think that's where it was left. And so I would suggest, if that is an area, if that is something that we need to talk about, I think the place that may be a better fit might even be our retreat. Now, I don't know how that fits within the March retreat, you know, unless we put it in there as this is a norm we want to create. You know, the norms don't have to necessarily be complicated. If you go back and look at the norms, our norms were, some of them were pretty extensive. And I think that was a reflection of a lot that was happening at that time. But then we have some norms, a couple that are not as extensive. And so if that is something, I definitely think it is good for all of us to be on the same page, but perhaps we may be able to have more fruitful conversations at the retreat. Let me ask your thoughts, Dr. Anderson.
Sorry, yes, I absolutely agree. And I'm with you, Ms. Hall. 2 years ago when we first started, this was kind of a hot topic among the board members, and so we discussed it extensively, and then it just kind of disappeared. So yeah, resurfacing that conversation and just kind of being able to have a consensus on how this looks for all of us as board members would be helpful.
And it may even, you know, so it sounds like it coincides. You know, I know there are some thoughts about how we might even collaborate at some point in the future or work together with the district. on those broader conversations on different things. And so definitely think, you know, in full agreement that something that we can talk about and all be on the same page about.
I'd like to get back to the question on the table about the renaming of the schools. I've received a lot of input as well and feedback from my constituents. And they're from all over the county, not just in my little district. And the feedback, and it's not a lot, but it is very consistent in that there is a yin and a yang. There's one group that says, oh, gee, run fast and rename that school. And there's another group of people who tend to align themselves with that historical view and the impact of changing the name of the school on everything. It's a 100-year-old history there. And so people are really concerned about how do I transition from I went to school at Chase Street to I went to school at whatever. And so the question is, how do you preserve that piece of their history as well as honor certainly a very well-deserving person in Mrs. Johnny Burke and the work that she's done. I tell you what, I've just come to absolutely admire her even more than I did before in this last, I guess, month or so, because she has been absolutely on top of pushing this idea forward of recognizing our history in terms of education in this community. And so I'll go ahead and confess that I'm working hard to get recognition for the 5 students that actually did start integration in Athens-Clarke County in 1963. I believe it was August. I will have a copy of the minutes from the board meeting that approved that for you as soon as I make more copies. And again, to read the book that Ms. Burke and her team put together, I literally sat down and read it again once I got it back. And I am more than ever convinced that we have an obligation to tell our history. We have an obligation to tell our past so that our future can be grounded on the wonderful things that are happening around us today. And there are a number of people that we need to recognize and honor in that regard. So I am still excited to hear from people, and so please do. I still feel strongly that we do need to do that, and I will, at the meeting, at the appropriate time, I will withdraw my request to name it Killian Burke, because I just think it's premature to do that now.
I do want to share that you know, I do think it's important. You know, one of the things that I've always respected about the board is that we give people room to make the decisions that they feel best about, that based on the information they have, based on what they believe is best for the district and the students. And sometimes that lands us on, you know, with different votes and different perspectives. You know, there's a good bit of agreement with what you've shared, Ms. Davis, and a good deal of respect, particularly because there were things that I just won't know from firsthand experience, you know, that I have to read about or, you know, go to the archives. But related to what you said, about, you know, some of those concerns. I certainly understand them to the degree that I can. And also want to just share that, and all of this is information that can be found in our local library or at our special collections library, but there certainly is a history. And before integration, we had black schools and we had white schools. And Alps was a school for white students. Chase was a school for white students. And so when we talk about the history, I believe that we do have to recognize all of that history. And there's no way around the fact that those schools were not integrated. We had East Athens as one of them, one of the African-American schools, right? and others. And so I feel strongly that, and I've shared this before in the LSGT meetings, you know, I don't know, I can't claim, and I won't, that there's this direct correlation or even a causal relationship between naming a school and outcomes. I mean, I think if it were that easy, we would have just renamed all of the schools. But I do think that there is something to be said about the identity of students and how we go about learning all of our history, not just Black history, but the history of Athens. And we have a history here that many of our students do not know. And while you know, what one may see as simply changing a name, that won't change that, but I certainly hope these conversations, regardless of where it falls next week, I hope that these conversations open up space for us to better understand our history here and to know that we didn't just get integration without somebody breaking the ice, without somebody making very bold decisions to integrate our schools. And there would not have been a need to integrate our schools had we not had white schools and Black schools. So as we celebrate history, you know, the 100 years, we particularly see this with some of our older schools. Chase is I think it was it 1922? I'll have to go back and double check. But schools that were built during that time were not schools for students of color. And so a part of that history and recognizing and celebrating that anniversary is talking about the history too. And so regardless of where this lands, I certainly hope that these conversations in the future have implications for future conversations as we work to better understand our history.
You and I could do this all evening, and we've had lunch, dinner, and talked about it. But the reality is, those schools were built during a time of segregation that was a federal law. Had nothing to do with wanting the kids to go someplace else. At the beginning of public education in Athens-Clarke County, there were 2 schools built, one for Blacks and one for whites on Baxter Street. And within a year or so, I'm not sure if it's exactly a year, the Black school was taken from the Black community or the colored children and given to the white community. At that time, West Broad School was built. And so as I can identify, especially with the people that want to honor that 100-year history, because I cannot imagine someone changing the name of West Broad Elementary School, and I do not wish to open that door with this act. I think there are other ways that we can honor and recognize the people who followed the 5 children who integrated our schools as a result of the 1954 Desegregation Act. And so I want us to tell a true history that is rooted in fact. And if we're going to recognize integration, we must recognize integration. Integration happened when Scott Killian, who lives directly across the street from Chase Street School, was approved to transfer to Chase Street School. When Marjorie Green, Agnes Green, and Bunny Hampton were approved to transfer to Child Street School. When Walusha Green was approved to transfer to Athens High School. That began integration of the public schools in Athens-Clarke County.
I'm going to keep my comments brief. I think that what the conversation that we had a few weeks ago kind of centered around our process, and I welcome revisiting that conversation because while I think that it's important to recognize individuals for their contributions to society, we also need to be careful that we as a board are not making decisions on behalf of our community, but rather that we are making a unified decision with our community because we were elected to represent our communities. And so one thing that I couldn't quite put my finger on as we were having these discussions over the last couple of months, was the exclusion of the community. And so having a process where we do have steering committees, where we have committee-led discussions prior to then naming or deciding that we're going to vote to name schools should be our next step. And I think that we should do that with anything that impacts our communities in the same way that this decision is impacting our community. So I would urge us to, I would like to see us kind of slow this process down and reintegrate the communities in this discussion and then come to a vote. I don't know why we're rushing to do this vote when we could develop a process now and be very thoughtful and consistent. But I will, I will concede to the will of the board, and if everybody wants to vote on it next week, we can do that. It just, to me, something has been really bugging me about it, and while I support it, I just think that the process needs to be more streamlined.
I definitely would agree. I think that's been something that, as it relates to at least the policy that's been brought up, which has the process embedded, within it. One of the things that I shared was that I think it could be perhaps some overlap and maybe some different perspectives, but I believe we are absolutely elected to make decisions on behalf of the community. No one else comes up here to take a vote but us. Now, governance requires that we speak with individuals in our community and different groups in our community. And to that degree, I certainly hear that feedback. How do we maximize who we are speaking with to be sure that all perspectives and voices are represented? But I also want to caution us with that. I fully agree with that. And when I made this ask, it was based on speaking with people in the community, in addition to the research that I had conducted. And so I don't want this to get held up in a philosophical difference about whether we need to do this particular thing or not. I don't want it to get caught up with the arguments of who. The process, sure. And I think I mentioned this when we were discussing it last week. There are going to be times that I don't know that we can make a decision, not necessarily about the renaming of schools, but have conversations about integration and also use the word unity. Integration, the process, and civil rights and equity, that's delicate work. And we get to values and we get to the core of people and families, and it's personal. And so I certainly agree that there needs to be a streamlined process, and would certainly advocate for a process that has as one of its steps, or multiple of its steps, to be sure that we are including maybe collectively as a board the community feedback. But I don't want to have on record that that has not happened. We have not done it collectively as a board. But I don't want any assumptions to be out there without knowing that I have had the opportunity to meet with and speak with different people. Now, should you take my word for it? No. I mean, I want you to speak with your constituents. I want you to do the research that's there. But I just want to be sure that I am clear about that. I also, as just a point of fact, want to remind us that when we renamed Howard B. Stroud, I think it was in 2007, I think he passed in March of 2007, that school was renamed a few months later. And so am I saying that is right or wrong? Absolutely no, because I believe that people have, that have our recognitions, they deserve it. And there are many more that we may not know about, but I want to be sure that I have at least from my perspective, put out there the context. And because I didn't have a conversation with this person, by no means that I did not have a conversation with stakeholders in the community. And so I just want to be, I want that to be clear more so for, for the record. And certainly, as with you, Dr. Anderson, I respect the will of the board and want to strongly encourage individuals to reach out to their board members about any perspectives they have about this.
So I would like to, that sat with me. Dr. Anderson, what you said spoke volumes, and I would like to propose that we just do or think about a yes and. I think even with the last round of conversations about the ability to have a town hall, and that's redefining norms of how we interact with constituents and wanting to have the ability to really listen to what the community is saying, I think that is so important. The names that you put forward, I fully support it. Like, I'll be very transparent with what I've learned. I think they're incredible women, and I would vote for that. But my informed vote needs to be informed. And so even the idea of now Tim having a town hall where we can go and listen and not just look at a handful of emails, I think we should maybe pause a little bit so that this doesn't falter, but redefine our process, see how we want to incorporate it, and then still make that same recommendation so that it is a unified vote and we do have the same information. Because just as we kind of sit up here and we get different information from presentations, our minds work differently, we perceive things differently, we receive things differently. So I think if we go through that process and we as a board can say, we've heard from our community, and this is what lies on my heart to vote and do what's best for these children and for our community, I think that's how we get to a sound policy, and that's how we all feel good about it. And if we don't do that, my fear is that we'll get to a vote and there will be no second, or it won't pass, and everything will fall down. And I do think this is an important topic. I do think that this is good work, and I do think we should keep moving forward. I just think maybe we should slow down the process, be a little bit more inclusive, not necessarily community-led, but definitely community-heard and voting with the mind and the ideas of what's best for the community. And I don't think we do that by rushing this vote for next Thursday. So just my 3 cents.
Thank you for sharing that, Ms. Hall. Any other perspectives? Any thoughts? Mr. Evans?
Yeah, so I feel like we've kind of painted ourselves into a corner here a little bit. And while I agree with what you said about how, we need to slow and maybe come up with a process and things like that, we've also made a decision. And I keep thinking about my granddad. My granddad was pastor in Michigan. He died. And when he died, all of a sudden, I was going to a banquet, it seemed like every other week, to celebrate him and celebrate who he was. And I remember driving home my grandmother, and she was like, it sure would have been great if they would have done this when he was alive. And the fact of the matter is that we are losing these heroes every day. And while I see where everyone's coming from, right, I think that we're at a point where we've kind of put ourselves into a position where we need to just kind of move forward with this. And we take that vote. I push for that vote for next week because, this is a person who, decided that she was going to take herself and her life and her career and go to a place that did not want her. And the amount of courage that it would take to do that, I know that I don't have. And so I really would like to honor her in that way. But I also agree with Ms. Davis. This can get real sticky real fast, because then all of a sudden we're naming garages after people and libraries and sports venues. And so I get where everyone's coming from, but I think that when it comes to this one, this is more of an isolated case. And I think that we should move forward.
I receive that, and I agree. I think with these individuals, I have no problem voting yes. I guess my fear lies in if we don't have an outlined process and say the board doesn't look like this in a couple of years, and somebody says, let's rename another school to Robert E. Lee Elementary, I'm gonna look at the board and I'm gonna be like, I need y'all to come and talk to me. I need y'all to come and hear our voices and hear what's good for the community. And so I think that's my only pause, right? Because the individuals, I don't have any qualms about that. They're awesome. They're heroes. I want them to have flowers and recognition while they're here. I just know that I'm not gonna sit in this seat for a long time. And this board may look very, very different, and I want the same process to work so that when I'm out there as a constituent, I feel like my voice is heard as well. That's it.
Dr. Yeager, and then Ms. Davis.
I'd just like to say we do have a process, and we followed our process. If we want to change the process, we have a process for changing the process. And we did follow the process, and the process is only about 1.5 years old. We had this conversation, I don't know, quite a while ago, I guess, but we did redo the process according to the board at the time, and we did follow the process. So I guess I'm a little confused about we need to do the process differently. We can't unless we go through the policy change. So that's just my comment. Yeah.
There were 4 teachers that bravely came forward to desegregate the faculty at our schools. Mrs. Johnny Burke at Chase Street, Mrs. Help me with Alps Road, Mrs. Holston, Mrs. Betty Holston, Ms. Jeanette Browning at Clark Middle, Mrs. Ruth Hawk at Athens High. Dr. Walter Allen, who became the band director for 3 different schools, this time taking him out of the Black community and putting him in other schools as well. I cannot look at Dr. Allen, who is still alive, Mrs. Hawk, who is still alive, and say to her, I dishonored you because we didn't treat you equally in terms of the respect. So I am concerned that we not do what we typically do. Again, I won't take anything from Mrs. Burke and her excellent committee on because this is where I learned most of this, from the Milestones in History book that she did, honoring Sam Woods for his bravery and making the hard decision to go ahead and follow the law and obey the law and start this process of desegregating the schools. I have not spoken to these other people. Mrs. Hawk was my teacher when all of us, under freedom of choice, that would be Ms. Berg and the teachers, as well as about 78 other students, entered the white schools. How do we pick 2? That's my problem. And so I am actually at a place where I would rather you're having these conversations with these 2 schools. I think it would be a good question to ask, how would you honor the first faculty Black person to enter your school? How would you recognize that person? How would that person now become a part of your story and your history? Because nobody knows about this. And the problem is we haven't done a good job of teaching our history. And so I would then ask, what about Child Street School that is burnt down? And so there's no school to ask, how do you honor the middle school students? I applaud Clark Central because last year or year before, they had a mural done, and Walusha Green's name is on that mural as one of the first as the first person to integrate that school. I speak about this so passionately because these are my friends. I grew up with these people. We were in the Girl Scout troops together. And Ms. Hawk was not my friend. She was my teacher. She was my Spanish teacher. And so it was a difficult time for every single person. How do you pick two? What can we do to make sure that we honor all of the teachers? I don't think any of the students are screaming to be anything other than left alone, pretty much. But they don't mind telling their stories, and that can be work for our school system in terms of helping us create our history and our legacy. That would be a great project that I'll go find somebody to help kick that off, because I think that's important, and I think that's significant. So I'm not asking us not to dishonor anyone. I'm simply saying, let's not let the person who brought the idea be the only person that we recognize. She didn't come to us with a "this is Johnny Burke's thing." She came to us with a Milestones in History book that she prepared and gave to every board member that had this history in it, and her purpose in doing that was to also recognize Sam Woods, the superintendent, who stood in front of a community and made it happen. So it feels unbalanced to me. And so I'm going to stop talking about it because I literally don't find myself changing my mind. So whatever happens, I'm not for this.
Yeah. I, Ms. Davis, you and I have spoken a few times, and I certainly respect and appreciate and value the experiences and opinions that you've shared with me. I will say that at any given time, we are choosing. Okay? When we decided to name this space after Vernon Payne, which I can't even begin to express the impact that he had on our children and his work with the board across the state in churches. He was actually my Sunday school superintendent. So, I mean, we are always choosing. We are certainly always choosing. And people are always worthy. And I don't see this decision as the individuals that fall within this particular category. I don't see this choice as excluding their worth or contribution. We've had the opportunity to rename facilities and spaces before that policy was renamed. And so I agree with you and urge our community, schools, if I may, to continue to think about how can we honor such a critical part of our history and the roles that individuals played. I don't think this is an either or. When we renamed Howard B. Stroud a few months after he passed, a person may say, well, there were others. There certainly were others. And they certainly were worthy. And so bringing these two names forward, I attempted to stay within the parameters of the policy because it said two names. If I could, I would have brought forth all five. And I don't think that is just me. I think historically that has been an option. And so I just want to, this is the last I'll say on it publicly here in this forum. I don't want this to be an either or. It doesn't have to be an either or. We can still ask questions about how do we recognize history. We can still ask questions about who else. We can still do work with our policy and ask how do we do this work? How do we improve it? How do we change it? And so this is not meant to override any of those questions. They can all exist together. The work can, all of this work can exist at the same time and in the same community. Mr. Denson.
Thanks. And I'll just be really brief because I think this has been a good discussion, but I think we discussed this for a while here and just maybe need a little more time. That I think speaking to Dr. Yeager's, your concerns about, we do have a process, and I think my concerns is more about what the process currently looks like, which is a lot more putting just the power on this board to kind of start the process, carry the process, and implement it. While there's not really any formal community-driven parts of that process. And I think that if we had that, it maybe gets more somewhat to some of the concerns that Ms. Davis is bringing up about how do we maybe defend these decisions on why some people get this honor and some people don't when there's so many people that do deserve it. That I think if we were able to, when we make these decisions, point to a public movement of the community who is pushing for something to happen with documentation that is there that comes to this, and then we decide to act upon that community request, I think that gives us a lot more standing and an argument for why somebody was chosen, why somebody wasn't. And so I think there's a way for us to kind of define that. Now, all that being said, I mean, I did look, I myself looked into the history of these fantastic educators, and also a little bit into the history of some of the movement to have these buildings renamed after them. And, looking back, that I think it was in 2013 that there was a formal request made by, what did I say here? A community committee, the Milestones in History Commemoration Committee, which put a request before the Board of Education to rename these two schools after Ms. Holst and Ms. Burks. I'm not sure exactly why at the time they did not, but I know this has been something that has been brewing for a long time. So I am happy for us to consider maybe a little bit of the both, as the yes and, that maybe we could move forward on this, but also commit ourselves to creating a process that is more community-driven and gives us more of a standing on why some people are picked and why some people are not. But I'm also very happy to maybe, postpone this vote till March, April meeting maybe so we can gather more of that community input. But I definitely think that we should move forward with this vote sooner rather than later, but I don't know if it has to be this month, but yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Denson. Any additional feedback or perspectives?
I'll be really quick. Ms. Davis, we are blessed to have you on the board to share that. As a board member, to me, just going back to the desire to hear from the community, hearing that is a wow, it's an aha moment, right? Because I'm not a native Athenian, and when I hear Walter Allen, I think about the zebra. So I was just educated here, and so I just really see the importance of having the ability to sit and hear and learn before we make such important decisions, because I'm not sure that every board will have a Ms. Davis on it to give insight, to give history, to give feedback for the board to consider about those things. So that's all.
Thank you, Ms. Hull. All right, if there are no additional perspectives to share, we will move forward here. We are at item 7, which is our superintendent's report. Dr. Hooker?
Thank you, Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to share with the board. I look forward to sharing my 100-day report to our citizens and to our community. Later on next week, I plan to meet with principals, divisions, share that with them. We'll hopefully have it online, posted online by next Friday. We have gotten it, or getting it translated. I will have a video that goes out with it, so we're looking forward to sharing the report and the things that we've learned in our first 100 days. And I want to thank you guys for supporting me during that process. District staff completed student shadowing. We're in the process of debriefing the review, the key findings from shadowing, and on how we can support teachers, staff, and principals based upon our observations. We were fortunate that we had 83 district office personnel to go shadow a student at each grade level, and several of us have had debriefs with small groups. We're learning interesting things, and I look forward to sharing that report with you after it's completed. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Hooker. Any follow-up questions for Dr. Hooker about that report? All right, we'll move forward to item 8, and item 8 is our presentations and discussions. The first one is USHCA, Central Office Review Presentation, and then we'll transition to special education, and then the MALTAT discussion.
Good evening, Board and Dr. Hooker. I'm here tonight to introduce to you the Urban Schools Human Capital Academy partners who have worked on the Central Office Review that was requested by the Board several months ago. They began that work this fall and have completed it and are ready tonight to share the results of that review with you. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce Jody Spolar, Craig Chin, and Avni Gupta Kagan, who will be sharing this information with you.
Thank you for that. Good evening, Board. We're excited and appreciate the opportunity to share a summary of the key findings and recommendations with this study. As just mentioned, my name is Craig Chin with Urban Schools Human Capital Academy. I'm joined by Jody Buckheit-Spolar. Thank you for waving, Jody. And at this point, each board member should have a copy of the full report in front of them that has our more detailed findings and recommendations. So tonight, what we did, we pulled out a handful of slides that we wanted to highlight around key findings from this study and also recommendations. And if the board is okay, we'd like to spend the next 10 minutes or so reviewing these summary slides. And at the end, we'll take questions if that's all right. So if there are no further questions at this time, we'd like to begin. Great. Chair, do you mind going to the next slide? I think we might be having some technical difficulty. I apologize.
I'm sorry, are you not seeing the screen?
We are. We're wondering, could you go to the next slide, Jody?
I can.
Thank you. Sorry, Jody. On the screen that I see, and I assume everyone else, I just see the cover page. Perfect. Thank you, Jody. So in this effort, our team took the following actions. 1, we engaged with key stakeholders to learn more about the current organization, functions, and objectives of each team. Then we benchmarked Clark County against other districts, both locally and others outside the state with similar characteristics. Third, we engage with key customers of central office to really assess sort of the delivery of services and support to try to get their perception or perspective on how they supported from a customer service perspective. And fourth, we developed a set of recommendations toward a more efficient and effective central office. I also want to point out, if you can see at the bottom, it says number 5. So what these slide numbers represent is actually the actual slide number in the full report. So we wanted to keep the slide numbers consistent, if you will, so in case you're following on the big report.
Thank you for that.
I did have a question, Madam Chair. And maybe I'm seeing this wrong, but last night I did pull this up and I was able to access the full report on the agenda, and the file does not seem to be there anymore.
Ms. Palmer removed the full report and replaced it with the summary report just for this period of time so that you all would be able to follow along with the presentation that they were giving. And as soon as this is over, she'll re-upload the full report again.
So why did it have to be removed? I'm sorry, I'm confused.
Because they've pulled out summary slides,
Right.
and we were afraid it would cause confusion. That's on me.
Okay.
I was
Yeah,
just
'cause-
trying to streamline the presentation so there was no confusion.
Okay, I do think it would be helpful for me and maybe for other board members if we were able to access the full file while they're going through this, so that we could see the file.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think Ms. Palmer's going to re-upload it very quickly for you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll continue in the meantime. Jody, do you mind going to the next slide? Here, we started with these guiding principles to guide our work. The first one, consideration for the alignment between central office structure and services with the overall goals and desired outcomes of the district. And second, organizational structures that should be used strategically and flexibly in order for the district to accomplish its objectives. So next, we're going to get into current state themes. In this next section, we'll provide a summary of the key current state themes. And again, I know that it sounds like not all board members have access to, in real time, the full report. But as I mentioned before, there's a lot more detail in the full report that we're not going to cover in tonight's summary.
Excuse me, are you going to name what the themes are on the pictures? Were those representative of the themes, or is that this slide? What are the current state themes? I guess is what I'm trying to ask. It's on the next slide. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, I understand, Lisa, you're uploading the full presentation. If it's okay, I'm going to continue, if that's all right.
It's fine. You can go ahead.
Okay. Jody, would you mind going to the next slide, please? As part of our team's efforts to learn more about the current state, we met with over 80 district stakeholders from both central office and schools. We also collected a number of key documents and artifacts shared to us by the district. And we benchmarked against other districts, which will share a lot more information in the next couple of slides. We categorize the benchmarking comparison districts into 3 categories. You'll see Group 1 on the left. These are similar sized districts in Georgia. Group 2 are other districts in Georgia with similar socioeconomic demographics. And then the third group are other out-of-state urban district examples. You'll notice at the bottom that Group 1 on average, they're generally similar size. However, their average student population represents a lower portion of families below the poverty level. Group 2 represent bigger districts, but have similar poverty levels. And lastly, Group 3, which is out of state, they're similar in size in both student population and poverty levels of their community. I first wanted to provide a bit more context on where we obtained this data. So we obtained this from the National Center for Education Statistics, which is a national nonprofit. They pulled together these measures for each district by pulling data from the U.S. Department of Education's database, who in turn pulls this data annually from each state. So just wanted to point out that where the source was. So based on benchmark data, we focus on 3 measures to compare central office spend in comparison to the 3 benchmark groups. One, we looked at total expenditures per student. Second, per student administration spend. And third, administration. So in particular, with expenditures per student, Clark County spends more per student in comparison to other districts in Georgia, but less than what other urban districts spend. With regard to the other 2 measures, Clark County spends less on central office, although in comparison to Group 1, the spending is approximately the same. But in summary, the data suggests that Clark County spends more per student, but less on central office. And I do want to point out a few caveats. So one, the way NCE defines these metrics, we don't have full detail on everything that goes into each measure. But a couple of things to note. First, districts may have different practices for how they classify spend as either administration, instructional, or student self-support. So that could also have a little bit of variability. We also use common data sources and use averages to hopefully mitigate some of that variability, if that makes sense. And second, the study on these measures analyzed total spend, not the number of individuals in central office. So compensation levels, depending on if other districts are paying less or more, that could have a direct impact on these measures, if that makes sense. So I also want to point out in the first section of the appendix, in the full report, there's greater detail around the benchmarking data. So we do want to point out it's always difficult to compare apples and apples when we're looking at different benchmarking sources and different measures, if you will. But based on what we have reviewed, it does not appear that central office is significantly larger in terms of central office spend than other comparable districts. Clark County is in the range, if you will, that could be appropriate for a district of its size. But the question that we are raising is whether the district is getting the outcomes for this investment. With all investments for public education, one should expect high quality outcomes, which is for certain. In the study, we did not assess the effectiveness of these key initiatives and strategies, but we did focus on the delivery of central office services. So here, before we share the highlights of what we learned from the current state review, we wanted to acknowledge that there are several strengths that exist, and we heard loud and clear from our stakeholder engagement. So one, the co-location of central office. Team members have mentioned just being in proximity of other teams and each other has led to a lot more conducive to teaming efforts, if that makes sense. Also, a lot of reference to the current strategic planning process that directs leadership actions. And also mentioned the alignment of departments have improved over time. Differentiation of school supports was another significant mention. Communications was a big improvement area they mentioned, especially during COVID. A lot of the communication efforts that went out were definitely a step in the right direction. At the same time, there are other specific services that were called out as positives as well. Even with these strengths, there are underlying challenges that the district is facing. In particular, high turnover among leadership. We know that there's been a lot of change in the recent 3 to 5 years with leadership in central office, and that can potentially affect a new team's efforts to drive change. Also, we all know about the teacher shortage that the nation, if you will, is facing. At the same time, the same sort of shortage is being faced by central office. And because of this, the lack of either inability to attract, if you will, or even hire, or even recruit, if you will, a number of qualified candidates for certain positions has led the departments to actually have to shift coverage, if you will, whether asking folks to take on more duties until certain jobs are filled. And that has had an effect on service. And also in some cases, the lack of integrated systems can create additional manual tasks for key processes, as there might be a lot of work that needs to be done that might not be supported by current technology. So I just want to give a quick summary of each area. So for the first area, which is around central office and school partnership. So one thing we heard from our engagement, especially with school-based staff, is that they felt that as a whole, central office, they use the term perspective that it can be viewed as disconnected. And they often don't see the alignment between the ultimate customer and then the work that the central office is doing. They also have reported that central office in some cases are hard to navigate when seeking help to resolve a certain problem or an issue or a question. And we actually heard one comment that talked about the lack of trust, which actually further deters staff from reaching out for support. Second, while the strategic plan and process does exist, a lot of staff has expressed sort of a lack of understanding of its overall role and its effect, if you will, in driving decision-making or what is happening against that. Some of that comes from resistance to change, potentially, but also some of it is because of processes that, or lack thereof, around the actual strategic planning process. We heard a perspective around a more compliance-driven approach as opposed to a process that could be more of a strategic tool to drive impact. Third, around accountability. We heard this often as well, that their perception or the perspective from a lot of different stakeholders that, you have some folks that are really going above and beyond, then you have others who aren't putting in quite the same level of effort. So along with those comments, that some are putting in, varying levels of effort to their work, they felt that the lack of collaboration is also a big variability, if you will, across the team. And there's a perception, that there's not a culture of high expectations, nor is there a performance management system and oversight to drive accountability. Number 4, around clarity of roles. So in addition to the lack of work standards, there's a general confusion about sort of what work falls with what team. And the perspective really comes from central office as well as school-based staff has shared sort of that bit of questioning. We heard this in particular with parts of the academics team and student support, where there's certain functions within both teams that they weren't sure where things might have started and where things end. And also with the principal supervisor role too, as far as lack of clarity in their role. The high turnover of leadership, shifting of responsibilities in the new phases is also a big contributing factor. And last, we have, and finally, if roles are clear, there aren't clear ways for teams to work with each other on cross-functional projects. We heard one particular comment that talked about ownership or lack thereof with key initiatives that, maybe a great idea is brought forth, but until it takes an individual to own it, there traditionally, at least from this perspective, there might not be a lot of cross-functional support to get things done. Joe, do you mind? Thank you. So next, let's briefly discuss the key building blocks for an effective central office. So here, we just want to quickly talk about the following components, which we feel from our experience are all essential to optimizing central office. So in the middle, you have strategic planning, and that not only provides direction, but also connects to actions in an overlying process to monitor progress along. The top left, people, and I think that's probably pretty self-explanatory, but this is the quality of staff with the right background and skill sets and competencies to do the work. Data to the bottom left, continuously leveraging data to monitor, measure, and support decision-making. Operational efficiency is processes and procedures that drive high levels of service and customer satisfaction. Now, on the flip side, with inefficient processes, teams could be focusing their time and energy away from the actions that best impact schools and students. And in the top right structure, this is the idea about organizing teams to effectively and optimally deliver services and support that are aligned with overall district goals and objectives. So next, we will present a summary of the key recommendations. Before we go into the details or the next set of recommendations, I do want to point out that we did not provide any detailed recommendations as to whether individual teams or departments are overstaffed or understaffed. So our experience has shown that the key building blocks, which we just covered, are essential before determining that sort of decision at that level. And based on our analysis, the district do have many things in place toward that, but we feel that there's still a lot of work that needs to happen with those foundational levels before it's determined whether certain teams are appropriately staffed or not. So as I pointed out before, there are a lot more detail in the full report, but I want to do a quick walkthrough of our recommendations that fall within each of those categories. So we organize our recommendations using this framework, which we just reviewed. And as a reminder, not only in the full report, but in the appendix as well, we provide some guidance and considerations to inform some of these recommendations. So I'm going to start in the top left with people. So we recommend that the district focus on two key actions within this category. One, to focus on better defining role clarity within the teams. So this could include reviewing job descriptions. It could include identifying or review of the identification of goals and objectives and desired outcomes per team or per role or per department, as well as potentially conducting desk audits as well. As mentioned previously, academics and student family supports are areas that were raised from stakeholder interviews as maybe a little bit unclear as far as how maybe work is divided or overlaps. And also with principal supervision, better defining the role, whether they're focusing on driving accountability, whether it's support and service, would also help clarify expectations for that particular role. Second, within the people bucket, is the focus on the decision-making process across teams. This could include mapping key processes to document key inputs and outputs by each team, and also regularly checking for key interdependencies. And also establishing protocols for meeting types, whether they are informational or the purposes of problem solving or consensus building, will also help. And on the third section of the appendix, we actually provide some tools and guidance on different meeting norms to identify which type of meeting could serve what purpose. Next, in the middle strategic planning, we recommend implementing a central office performance management system that focuses on two big areas. One, from a department perspective, aligning goals across all teams by implementing an annual goal development process for each team that aligns district goals would be helpful. And these should include both team and individual goals, as well as both lagging and leading indicators in order to monitor progress as the work is going on. And as part of this, instilling a culture and discipline to continually monitor these goals will be critical, as opposed to just focus on short-term problems and issues. And at the individual level, we recommend implementing a process that includes goal development at the individual level, progress monitoring for individual progress, and also a self-assessment process to allow employees to have sort of a little bit ownership and agency within the goal setting and implementation process. The other big focus area around strategic planning is we recommend to establish standards of service. So to inform this may include gathering regular feedback from key stakeholders and customers. This could be done through surveys or focus groups. It could also be another helpful action could be developing a leadership competency framework, which would help identify the expectations, whether you're a director or you're a manager, or depending on where you are in the hierarchy. This will help set expectations on what the competencies that are expected or to be developed within each role. At the same time, those competencies could also be very helpful as you start to look and recruit and hire and select to fill vacancies. At the bottom is data. Here we recommend either a central office data dashboard or some type of process to improve the transparency of data tracking at the highest level. And dashboards will help with transparency and can also be leveraged with leadership to focus the work in these key outcomes. In addition, we recommend identifying, documenting, and streamlining key processes around data by creating standard operating procedures and focusing on those processes that are most complex or frequent. And also we heard from stakeholders that from a policy perspective, we know that a lot of policies are documented, but from a lot of perspectives of our engagement efforts, folks weren't clear on where to get them or are they easily accessible. So what ends up happening is they'll pick up the phone to call someone to try to get clarification, but based on what we shared earlier, a little bit lack of either clarity or confusion on who to contact could also lead to further confusion, if that makes sense. Next, we'll go quickly to operational efficiency. So we recommend improving service to schools and customers. This should focus on prioritizing principals as a key customer, and also developing a method to differentiate services to schools would help, as not all schools need the same level of support. Also consider establishing sort of a school leader advisory board. We know that there's already a teacher advisory board, and so establishing something similar we think could go a long way in providing voice, if you will, to other leaders in the district. In addition, we'd recommend establishing a single point of contact for principals. Think of this as a person, if you will, or a small team that principals can contact for sort of all their issues or questions, if you will. In turn, these folks would own the problem, find out and gather a resolution, get an answer, and get back to principal. And then lastly, we would suggest sort of a call center type of operation. Think of it sort of like a help desk for IT support, essentially with a ticket system, but this is for employees where they would be calling in, or whether electronically or through a phone, they'd be calling into a call center, if you will, or a call center team, where the idea is that this team would enable, or this process would enable better tracking of service. It would be able to figure out how long it takes on average to resolve issues, and it'll be can also track turnaround times, if you will. And then last is organizational structure at the top. So we feel that any changes to the org structure should be informed by the superintendent's long-term strategic priorities, and the recommendations we develop throughout this report hopefully aim to serve as a key foundation for a new structure. And in the full report, we have provided some decision-making guide whether organization should be very flat or should be more vertical, or whether your Clark County is looking for a decentralized or centralized approach. Again, there are some decision-making tools, if you will, we provide in the appendix to provide to guide some of that thinking and design process. And that's in Appendix 2. So next we want to open up for questions. I do know that I think it might be Dr. Blankenship that where she's going to help us document any questions that the board may have so that we can make sure we hear it clearly and answer accordingly.
Ms. Hull.
So while I don't want to speak for my colleagues because I don't know where you are with the information, I think there's been really good information presented generally, but it didn't get to the question that I wanted to have answered with commissioning this or voting for this. I think, or at least for me, the question was about the staffing issue, making recommendations in terms of the efficiency with districts in similar situations with similar student count, poverty, teachers, and wanting to see if we were too top-heavy and making recommendations for efficiency that way. So as I look at slide 8, and it says the key question then may not be whether central office is overstaffed. That was my key question. So I'm not sure if that is the same amongst my colleagues, but that I was hoping to learn more information about what other districts are doing in terms of their central office and leadership so we could do a comparison to make sure that we were lean where we needed to be lean and heavy where we needed to be heavy. Thank you.
Yeah, I could answer that very quickly, and Jody, please chime in. So we did not get into by department perspective, but based on the data and benchmarking we did across those 3 groups, both, the local districts, if you will, the other urban districts within Georgia, and also the urban districts of similar size across outside of Georgia. Sorry. Based on those findings and measures, our takeaway is central office is not overstaffed. And again, the metrics we use was spend, if you will, spend as a percent of administration for overall district budgets. So, but if the question is, did we look at each individual team? We did not do that, though.
I would just augment that answer with saying that given the current state, which includes a new leader coming in, and a number of transitions in leadership in recent years, it became important to answer. I think the core question you were looking at was, is central office right-sized for your district? And so we really tried to dig into the benchmarking so that we could share with you that from everything we see, Clark County is right-sized in terms of the spend of central office. So if you think of the pie as the right size for central office, the question of how big each slice of the pie should be, we think that, as we said in those first two core principles, how that pie is divided needs to align with your key initiatives and your goals so that you have the capacity in the areas, the departments, the roles that are tied to the outcomes and goals that you have. So we saw it as giving you the information that you have the right size pie, but as you align on what your goals and initiatives are, and as you address some of the opportunities to improve role clarity, have more accountability with regard to performance, those are the sort of the necessary prerequisites to making those decisions about where particular positions or teams should be adjusted. So that was the way we approached the project, given your current state of, again, having these elements that need and have an opportunity to be improved upon, and also bringing in a new leader and aligning a future, maybe not a whole-scale restructuring, but some realignment of roles and teams so that they provide the appropriate capacity to implement successfully the goals and initiatives.
Mr. Denson?
Thank you. And yeah, I have a few questions. Right now, I'll just focus. I have a couple questions on the benchmarking. For my first question, I saw like on the localized or the similar population size benchmarking group. I think it said that CCSD staff provided that list to you. Y'all did not come up with that list your own.
That's correct, yes. We worked with the CCSD team to figure out the right list districts to put in group one.
Okay. And then I saw that you, for that you cite the data gathered from the National Center for Education Statistics. And I guess I looked through, last night at least, I looked through the spreadsheet where you actually had the breakdown of the benchmarking. But again, at least as for right now, I still can't access that full report, so I can't get to that right now. Okay, I'll try to refresh so I can get into there now. But anyways, I did go through some of the ones in the local group, and I just wasn't sure how you guys were categorizing the idea of administration, I guess, because then I went through the NCES website for the schools that are in that group, and when it comes to the category for district administrators, it has CCSD listed at 38, but then if you do an average of all the other schools listed in the group one, their average is literally half of that for district administrators at 19. And so I think the piece I'm missing there is how y'all categorized who is administrative, I guess, because it looks like it's a little bit different than the way the NCES did it, which is the stat that you all pulled from. So I don't know if there's a way. But yeah, just in general, when I pull up that, I looked at district administrators, 38 for CCSD, average of 19 for Louds, Walton, Rockdale, Barrow, Marietta, and Griffin Spalding. And then if we look at district administrative support, CCSD at 34, and the others are 20, 27, 15, 22, 22, 13. So it seems like we are quite a bit larger when it comes to district administrators and district administrative support.
Yeah, I think we can definitely get back to, because I do know the measures that we around per student administration spend and percent budget administration. Obviously, those are the two of the three that we highlighted. We're pulling from there, but we can get back to you and further look into the numbers that you just shared around those actually number of administrators, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, just to seeing some of the, and I do, and so that way we can have an understanding of what exactly who you all were categorizing when you came up with that average budget percentage for administration. But I think it also would be just helpful to see the raw data of how many people we have working in our central office compared to how many people are working in the central office of other these other groups.
Yeah, we can look at that in greater detail and get back to you.
I have a question, I guess, related to that. When determining if Clark County was relatively the same, given its size and compared to other districts, like comparable districts, how was that conclusion drawn? So not necessarily like what did you use, like which schools and what categories, but what led to that conclusion, like what type of analysis per se? Because it sounds like you all, you were able to see based on like spending and then the size of individual or the number of individuals that are here, that relatively speaking, there's no significant difference. And so I'm just curious about what led to that conclusion, not necessarily the numbers, but like the analysis of what led to that conclusion.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we tried to compare apples to apples by using the NCES data. And then as we've described, we identified those three buckets. And when we looked at the per student administrative spend, so what comparable districts in those three buckets are spending, both as a percent of total budget and per student, as we've noted, the CCSD is certainly not out of line there. If anything, they are a little underspending as compared to those three buckets of other districts as we've described them, again, within your state and out of state. So as we looked across the total number of districts that fell into those different buckets, we started to see that there was no indication that your district was in any way out of line or top heavy, so to speak, in terms of its spend, either as a percentage of per student or as a percentage of your total budget.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Ms. Davis?
Thank you. I don't know that I necessarily have a question for the consultants. I just want to know do we have plans to spend some time with this report collectively and perhaps then have some other dialogue, because there's a lot in here, and I really appreciate the level that I saw in the full report of the rationale for how you presented this information to us. And you stated up front that you didn't get to the individual departments and things of that nature, but I noticed that in all of your slides, in terms of our solutions and outcome, the very center speaks to strategic planning. Did I see a slide in here that reflected how we are absolutely, or how we are comparing with the things in our strategic plan? Did I see something in here that connected those two in terms of our current state? So my ask is there something in this report that indicates our level of compliance with or support of our strategic plan?
So the word compliance comes up with regard to the strategic plan, and that when we did focus groups and talked with others, they expressed sort of a disconnect with the strategic plan in terms of it being a roadmap that was applicable to all the functions of the district. And I think the report identifies that some indicated that it felt more of a compliance. You're required to have a strategic plan, and so there was one there, rather than something that was in, and again, in some districts, a performance management system flows from a strategic plan and really cascades from the leadership of the district down through every position in the district. And it was expressed that they did not feel that perhaps the current strategic plan was able to sort of drive the work of all aspects of the organization, and in this study, particularly that of central office.
One last question. You indicated throughout here that we have a situation, or our situation is that we have had significant turnover in administration and in superintendencies. How does a district prepare itself to continue on the path of directing its services in support of students in spite of? What is the thing that I'm looking for, the guiding star, the North Star that we should focus on to actually continue the work that we are here for in spite of these changes that we're seeing? Give us some idea as to what we should be building.
Yeah, I could go first, and please, Jody, comment as you feel necessary. So I don't have a silver bullet. I don't think Jody nor I has one, but I can tell you what we see with certain districts that are better prepared, if you will, to sort of address sort of change in leadership or to change in anyone. And I would say, and I don't want to use a buzzword, but succession planning. Districts that have a strong program with empowerment, sort of identifying sort of who's next, if you will. And some of this could be very programmatic driven, where it's very purposeful, either via training or job sharing or supports, if you will, in guidance and mentoring, or can be very informal or organic, if you will, where every respective leader is sort of making sure under their umbrella that whether
Seems that my colleague's screen is frozen, so until he refreshes, I was going to be in a similar place. Certainly, succession planning is something that is always a core recommendation to equip a district for turnover. Secondly, as we just spoke of, having a strategic plan that really drives the work of teams and positions allows, someone stepping into a role to have a really clear understanding of what is expected of them to keep the work moving forward. And again, we see districts that have, and we've worked with districts that have implemented essentially a strong cascading goals led by a strategic plan and maintained through a strong performance management system that really drives, it's sort of the engine, if you will, to keep going in the direction that the district, has set for itself, as you said, so that you can continue, to meet the goals for students that you have. So thinking about those things, and another piece is, we mention in the report that there is an opportunity to strengthen cross-functional, collaboration across central office and between central office and schools. And those structures, when they're strong and healthy, are also another way to insulate a district from turnover in any single role. When you hear the word siloed, when organizations start to feel as though they are siloed, they are really not resilient in the face of turnover. And so some of these sort of structures and initiatives around making certain that there's role clarity, a strategic plan that has cascading goals, succession planning, vibrant and really effective cross-functional structures. All of those things are going to make an organization more resilient and better able to sort of stay the course, even as individuals drop off or change and you experience some of that turnover.
Thank you.
Sorry for dropping everyone.
Mr. Denson?
Thank you. And just had one more comment on this, and definitely looking through, and I highly recommend everybody try to find some time to read the full report, because in between, when it goes into explanation on the findings, those 5 findings, I think there's some pretty insightful quotes and such from our staff that was interviewed and their experiences. And I definitely look forward to working with Dr. Hooker for us to be able to kind of tackle these things and solve some of them. A lot of them talking about having unstable and inconsistent leadership and a lot of turnover. So I think that there's a real opportunity for us as a board also to just be able to step up and show very consistent and sustained and grounded leadership and commitment to work with the administration to tackle these things. But I think one of the biggest things that comes into our purview is the references to strategic planning. And definitely some comments here that I've shared, that I read about the strategic plan just being way too vague, not having obvious, outcomes that are expected and measurable goals. That a lot of work that I think that we could do that. So, not knowing completely on the process that we do our strategic planning kind of stuff, but that would be something else I would love for us to be able to discuss when we go into our retreat, is maybe just more of what our process would be for us, maybe revamping or relooking at our strategic goal to kind of assess some of the issues that were identified here.
I do have a question. Will we be able to access the data that was provided from the district to the company for research? Or will we be able to look at the raw data that the company used in terms of what it used in terms of research?
We should be able to share that information with them, am I correct?
If you're speaking about the National Center for Education Statistics, I believe that data comes from the state. I am not aware, and I don't know, Byron, if
That's
you
not
have
what
any
I'm
more.
referring to.
Okay.
When I'm looking at the proposal that was submitted, number 1 says to review the current organizational structure, scope of responsibilities, key performance objectives in order to identify opportunities to streamline the structure. I would like to see the current organizational structure and the scope of responsibilities and the key performance objectives. Likewise, if data was used from comparable districts in terms of what their central office size is, what their role and responsibilities are, I would like to actually see what those counties look like in terms of their central offices and their roles and responsibilities, so that I can kind of piece together the information that I would need to feel comfortable with this information.
We can provide you with the artifacts and resources that we provided to the Urban Schools Human Capital Academy. As far as data from other districts, I believe that was all pulled. We provided, Dr. Hooker shared with them a list of districts that he felt were comparable in size and socioeconomic status across the state. And then they pulled that data from the National Center for Education Statistics. But we can certainly, I'm happy to work with them to try to dig a little deeper into that data as you have requested.
And it may be here. I haven't read the full report, so if it's in the full report, please do let me know. But what I'm trying to see is if Rockdale, if we're using that as a comparable district, can I pull Rockdale Central Office and see what their organizational structure is? Is that here?
One thing that is in the report right now is we looked at the direct reports to the superintendent for the comparable districts, and we included a couple charts that show the number of the direct reports, which is essentially revealing the organizational structure of those other districts. So that is in the report, but we can, work to, and follow up with anything additional through Dr. Blankenship.
And if it's there, again, my apologies. I just think I'm looking, because if it's not there, then I want to know that it's not there. I want to see, like, Chief Academic Officer in Walton County has this responsibilities, and here are the objectives, and here it is from Rockdale County, so we can look and say, this is what we're doing in Clark County. If that information is not there, that is okay. I think that's the information that I'm looking for. So if it's not there, I would like to know that too, so I don't get frustrated reading through the entire report.
Yeah, to quickly answer your question, in our report, we did not get down to, like, for example, looking at the chief academic officer role and what is under their purview in other districts.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank them for their report, and I do want to share with the board, as we talked about my 100-day report, a lot of this information I gathered from the community, and a lot of these things we are addressing. Strategic plan, we're in the process of revamping that. So we've taken these into consideration, and the districts that we selected, or I selected, were based upon GOSA, Georgia Office of Student Achievement, compared with districts. That's where I get the information from, and you're correct. Looking at the chief office, academic officers and different things, looking at how they did things compared to theirs and how effective. The thing I have always said, I want to look at high-performing school districts similar size. We're working to get to become a high-performing school district. Yes, we're going to have to make some changes. And we're working as a team. As he said, departments can no longer work in silos. We have to work cross-functional. We're getting to that point. We are developing standard operation procedures in each department. We're getting there. It's going to take time. Work with us. We're getting there. As Mr. Denson says, the board support is very much needed. Going to need your input as well. But as district leaders, we're on the right road to make these corrections. As I said before, we're reading. We're looking at things that's going to get us there. And I'm looking forward to working not only with the board, but with our district leaders to make it happen. You will see changes.
So my last comment is I really appreciate the report. I spent a lot of time with it. I was really happy to see that. And for me, coming from corporate, I was reliving this experience when we decided that we needed to understand what our core business was, and we went through this process. So from experience, this is really going to be transformational. I'm going to use that word for us, because as we look at how we go forward, then we will start to identify some brilliance out there that we've not seen yet, because we haven't unleashed it. And so I'm looking forward to the changes that you're going to be making. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for this information.
Thank you.
We'll move forward to item 2 under number 8, which is our presentations and discussions. And this is our special education presentation.
Good evening. For those of you that I have not had the opportunity to meet, my name is Heidi Hill, and I'm the Executive Director of Special Education. I get the privilege of serving students and families that I like to refer to as perfectly abled in our community. And this evening, I am here to hopefully forward this slide. Am I clicking?
Could you speak a little closer into the microphone, please? I'm having a hard time hearing you. I'm sorry.
I just turned it on. I think it would. Yes, I can. Is that better? Thank you. Here we go. This evening, during my time with you, we are going to look at current numbers of students with disabilities by school, the number of teachers and paraprofessionals, as well as current staff vacancies and ones that are being served through contracted services. Where we'll also review this exceptional education student department structures, our programming, and I would like to take this opportunity to share a few initiatives that we have begun during this school year. On this slide, you will see the number of students served in special education by school. You will also see the respective number of teachers, as well as paraprofessionals. I would like to highlight there are some differences between schools for 2 factors for consideration. One is purely the fact that some of our schools are different, they are different sized. And the second is because we do cluster some of our special education services. And what I mean by that is that we do not offer every special education program for some of the lower incident population at every school. So to specifically point out those schools where you might find a variation that would be related to the cluster, that would be Alps, Barnett Shoals, Cleveland Road, Fowler, Gaines, Stroud, Oglethorpe, and Timothy. The total number of students served at the elementary level can be found at the bottom, 1,135. The number of teachers allocated to serve these students, 97, and the number of paraprofessionals, 73. This slide, you can see the exact same information, only specific to our middle schools. 464 total students served at the middle school level, 55 teachers, and 31 paraprofessionals assigned to support the students. And at our high school, we have the total for the high school is 530. That number, 2,129, is reflective of the total number of students served in our special ed program across the district. Specifically at the high school level, you will see 46 teachers and 26 paraprofessionals. As we move ahead to district-based special education staff, we currently have my position, Executive Director of Special Education. We also have an administrative budget assistant and an information support specialist, 5 special ed coordinators, 1 coordinator of behavior supports, 1 coordinator of speech and language pathologist, 24 speech and language pathologists, 1 transition specialist that is assigned to both Cedar Shoals and Clark High Schools, 11 behavior specialists, 1 parent mentor, 1 interpreter, and 1 part-time nurse assigned to medically fragile students. All of our speech and language pathologists are located in schools, as well as the transition specialist. And most all other employees listed above, actually, while they do have an office space here, you will rarely find them here. They are providing direct services in our schools to teachers and students. The topic of contracted special education positions by school. Unfortunately, after we have positions that are not able to be filled, again, the same teacher shortage impacts our special ed teachers as well. We have reached out to contract companies. We currently contract with 3 companies. And those, the number of positions by school that are filled with a contract company at the elementary level are listed here. You will find the same topic, contracted positions by school, for our middle schools and high schools listed on this slide. After we take into account all of our positions allocated, as well as our contracted positions that are filled, these, as of 2 days ago, are currently our vacant positions at each of our respective schools. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that numbers, there are some variances specific to our numbers because we have some schools that house specialized programs through our quadrant or our cluster program-based model. I would like to point out on this diagram, on the far right side, you will find a legend. And the schools that are coded yellow, the adapted, those are students that are not accessing grade level standards, and they are served in a specialized program. Interrelated are students who are accessing grade level standards. And then in purple, we do have some pockets of schools that are programs that are not offered at every school, but that are clustered by location. And you will find identical programs with the exception of severe and profound, located on both sides of the district. And a very a big picture overview. This year we have worked as a department to do specific work related to dyslexia. We have expanded dyslexia endorsement for our teachers across the district, both regular ed and special ed. I'm very proud to share with you that we currently, while RESA offered tuition or spots for 3 individuals, Clark County enrolled every teacher who expressed interest and covered their cost. And the total that we currently have in dyslexia endorsement would be 14. And so we are proud of that initiative for the first year. We also, a year ahead of schedule, we are implementation of the dyslexia screener, specifically for kindergarten through 2nd grade. We actually are doing that work for our schools so we can work the kinks out, and we have a dyslexia task force, a cross-functional team that is leading that work and actually going into schools and screening students ourselves. And then we will do a warm handover to schools once we get the kinks worked out. We are working on continuing our expansion of the implementation of direct reading instruction for all students K-12. This is our first year that we have a direct reading instruction program offered in every school across the district. I'm very proud of that initiative. As we're working with allocations, we're looking to expand that to ensure that it's across every grade. Professional learning for special education teachers. We are working to do job-embedded professional learning specific to specially designed instruction, co-teaching, high-leverage practices. We have targeted support for new special education teachers. This year we partnered with Human Resources as part of the new teacher orientation, and we are continuing to support those teachers throughout the year. And then, of course, I mentioned just a minute ago, job-embedded coaching for all of those topics to ensure that it's not just come and sit and get, but it's actually coaching and role modeling, and then supporting the continued implementation of those practices. So at this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to you, Dr. Hooker.
Thank you, Ms. Hill, for that presentation. Now, board, we will take questions.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Ms. Davis?
Thank you. I enjoyed this report. I think you're having more fun now, right? It's really different than a couple of years ago. So I think this shows that some really exciting things are happening in your world. So as I look at this report, I did a comparison because you gave us the number of teachers and the number of kids, and so I did that little ratio really quickly. And it seems to be pretty equitable across the line in terms of how resources are being allocated. So when I got to this part about related, interrelated, this is new language to me. Tell me what interrelated means again. I got the adopted.
Sure. Interrelated would be all of the students who are accessing grade level standards.
Okay.
They are sitting in our regular ed classes. They might have services of an additional special education teacher pushed into that regular ed class to provide support. They might have an opportunity to have that direct reading instruction class. They might have an opportunity to have a pull-out or a direct serve in that subject area. But the main difference would be whether they're being assessed through our state and county assessments or whether they're being assessed through the Georgia Alternative Assessment. And so all of those students, when you look at academic performance, you will see that you can pull out the performance of that subgroup, and you can see how they perform related to all other students, both within our district as well as the state.
Fantastic. When you say cluster some of the services, what did that mean?
Yes, ma'am. So we have some, I'm going to call them low incidence because they don't, the number of students who need that particular program are not as high as some other programs. And so we are allowed to offer certain programs at specific schools and not offer that program at all schools. So for example, we have students served in our Severe and Profound program where their intellectual ability is significantly lower. We don't have the number of students to support having that program at every school. And so instead we offer that at Stroud, and then we offer that at Hills Bend Middle, and then we offer that at Cedar Shoals. And so, and then all students in the district go to that respective school based on their level.
That's interesting. And so, yeah, I'm going to have to look at that as a percentage of all of the students in those schools. So
I can tell you, Ms. Davis, that we have a little over 2% of our students that are served or that are assessed with a Georgia Alternative Assessment. And so another example of that would be an adaptive program. We don't offer that at every elementary school, but we do offer that at those 7 schools that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
And so that is also part of that 2%.
this is probably not your question, but I want to know, what is the impact on the overall school performance with the populations that are there?
Based on the cluster model?
Yes.
Great question. Their performance actually goes back to their home school. And
Okay.
so while we are serving students in that school, they're actually all sent back to their home school. So when you're looking at school performance, it does take into account that those students have been removed.
So if their instruction is at a different school, but their performance goes back to
Their home school.
home school.
Mhm. Yes, ma'am. The other piece with that, though, is that those students that are being served, they are on the Georgia Alternative Assessment.
Right.
That's what they're being assessed on. They're not being assessed on
Okay.
grade level standards.
Okay. Excellent.
Others?
That was all I had. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Davis. Dr. Yeager?
I just have a quick question. How often do kids get moved from one school to another as the programs get shifted around?
I'm going to say this, and I'm hoping I don't have to knock on wood. Our programs have been stable. They have not moved from school to school. If nothing else, we've actually have opened up new programs to expand the opportunity to be served closer to their home school. So I'm not saying never. I don't have the data, and I would have to pull that to see how many kids we actually reassign to a different school each year, but it's not. Once they are in a school like K-5, they typically stay there, and then we have conversations about transitioning them to the appropriate feeder school for the next level.
Okay, I did have another question, triggered by what you just said.
Hold on one second, Ms.
Oh.
Davis. Let me be sure that, Dr. Yeager, are you finished with your questions? And I want to be sure that, see if other people have questions or
I guess I'd
feedback.
like to see the data, because I've heard a different story from some parents, that their
Okay.
kids are getting shunted around. So I would love to see the data, if you could gather that at some point
We
on
can.
your own time. Of course, thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. Hall?
Hi. So we have a lovely relationship. I'm really proud of what our district has done in terms of where it has been and where it's progressing. So I want to say that before I ask for clarification. My question is, can you provide some clarification or background around the expectations of the parent mentor? As a parent who has had a child with an IEP for several years across schools, I've never seen this person outside of a special education night. And even as a former special education attorney who would come here, I never saw this person interact with parents. And so if we are paying for a position, I would like clarity on what are the expectations of this person to reach out to our parents, to ally with our parents, because everyone can't afford an attorney and they shouldn't have to, especially when we're paying for it.
Sure. That is a part-time position. I want to start there. And we did apply for a grant. It's in partnership with the state. So the state pays for, it's a part-time position, and so then we pay for half of that part-time position, and the state grant pays for the other half. We did add to our minutes in terms of, we've asked all special ed teachers to mention to parents during IEP meetings that a parent mentor is available. She also has a brochure that she has pushed out to special ed teachers, and at every opportunity we try to mention her availability and her and Jerry as a resource. So if I'm hearing you say it's never crossed your path, then obviously that's an opportunity to do a better job with putting that out there as a resource. But those are the pieces that we have put in place. I can tell you that she's very busy, and that she attends many IEP meetings. She makes phone calls. That she is available. She does a significant amount of work at the Office of Early Learning with parents that are coming in where everything's new. And so she does spend a good bit of time over there as part of Child Find, as well as coaching parents around the new process and helping make sure that they're informed.
Ms. Davis? Hmm?
Is it me again? Okay, so is there a wait list for children to be assessed for these services?
A wait list assessed through Child Find, like our itty bitties, or a wait list assessed through kids in our in our kindergarten through 12th grade program?
In our K through 12 program especially.
We legally cannot have a wait list, and so we have to respond. So the answer is no. Okay. And if there is a difference of opinion there, I would love the opportunity to have further conversation through Dr. Hooker, of course. But we respond through our MTSS process. When the team decides that it's appropriate to make a referral, that referral is done. I can tell you when parents make the request that we do respond in kind to that request. And if the decision is made not to do an evaluation for a child for very specific reasons, at the conclusion of that meeting, a prior written notice is provided to the parent outlining why the evaluation will not take place. I facilitate all of those. I provided one parent with one meeting, and that was after they actually rescinded their evaluation. So that's not a practice that we typically do. We typically do respond by just evaluating students with parent request.
So what triggered this question is I was talking to a teacher, and she was talking about like since school has started already, that this teacher has had like 7 kids, the transient community, coming in from different states. And so that just made me wonder, is there a delay in getting those assessments from children that come in, and then they can start something at one school and then they're at a different school, in another couple of months? How are we handling that transiency? Did I say that right? Transiency. Yeah, that's right.
So if I heard you say, and if I didn't hear you correctly, please correct me. I heard you say that we are waiting on records to come in. And so there are times where we have students enroll in our district that we're not aware that they received services in their prior district. As soon as we're made aware, then we of course do chase those records, or as soon as they appear, we of course respond immediately and to make sure that we're offering those services and or to see if any evaluations need to occur as part of that in-state transfer.
Thank you.
May I ask a couple of questions? The assessment, I think it's the GAA assessment.
Yes, ma'am.
I know that we have, like with the platform, like the dashboard, you know, how we can go in and see, you know, like scores and things like that.
It's not loaded there.
Okay, and is that like, I don't know all of the law around that. Like, how do we get access to that to see how our students who are served through special education, who are assessed in this manner, are doing?
We can provide you with a big picture look at that. That would be the entire group. Once you get into, because some of the subgroups are so small, we're not able to provide them at the school-based level because that would be, the subgroup is too small. And so, but I could provide you with a look at the entire district in terms of their performance specific to the alternative assessment.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wondering, because I would think that under that assessment umbrella, you know, it's not just seeing, you know, or even the reports, how our students are doing on our ready or our milestones, but really, you know, also how, you know, these students are doing as well. So I was just curious about if, you know, if it's possible.
I would be very proud to
that.
share that report with you because I think you would be pleased, equally pleased as well.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a couple other questions. The behavior specialists that are here, and I guess it would be beyond the behavior specialists as well, but like under the professional learning, I know like a couple of years ago when you all presented, it was very, like just a lot of good information. And at that time, there were questions around professional development related to cultural competency. And it was shared with us that culturally relevant training, that at that time, that was the goal, you know, to be able to provide that support for our staff. And I'm guessing for special education teachers as well, so for the staff as a whole. Where are we with that? And how has that gone?
So our behavior specialists did participate in that training, and then they did train the trainer within the team of behavior specialists, and then they continue work to incorporate those principles into the work that they do with teachers and staff. That is a continued conversation that we have. It's also a conversation that we connect to trauma, and we partner with our trauma-informed specialists to kind of combine all of that together to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our diverse population.
Mm-hmm. And so like with this, so there are professional developments that have been delivered related to
At
trauma
the school-based
and cultural.
level, yes. Now, since we currently have trauma-informed specialists, again, our behavior specialists are partnering with them, and so they're co-presenting at this point, but they are providing those professional learning opportunities to schools at the school level.
Okay. And then my last question would be, I do appreciate Ms. Davis's question about like where the legend is. Because I don't, you know, I think all of us maybe, but I know certainly myself still trying to figure out like the definitions of adapted and interrelated. My question is, I don't know if this is more for you, Dr. Hooker, or perhaps both of you all, but what prevents us or districts from full inclusion? Like there are a lot of different programs, and this is not just since you've gotten here. This is historically since I attended Clark County as a student. When I worked in Clark County, you know, there are different programs in different schools, and sometimes like students don't get to go to school with their sibling, and they may go like to another school that offers that program. Like you were mentioning, like it has a few, you know, there are certain schools that may offer the adapted programs and things like that. So I guess I'm wondering what keeps us from full inclusion. Is it a financial thing? Is it a philosophical thing? Particularly when what I'm hearing is that, like with low incidences, it's not a large number. And so I'm wondering, like, what prevents us from allowing students to be with their classmates? I don't know if it's more of a philosophical thing, and even if I know with the districts you've been in, I know there are different models and things like that, but I'm just curious about that.
So it is a process that we have focused on over the last few years. And so I can tell you that when you pull our percentage from the state, and again, that data is like a year in the rear, we're right about 90% of our kiddos are provided access to a regular ed class during the day. I can also want to say that while not ideal, that siblings are allowed to attend. So if a student attends a school out of their zone to receive services, their siblings may attend that school as well, and we will provide transportation for them. Not ideal, not what you're specifically referencing, but I don't want anyone to think we're splitting families up to go to different schools. So the continual consideration when IEP teams meet is just that, is how can we keep them at their home school? That's our first priority. How can we provide them access to regular ed classroom, to non-disabled peers to the greatest extent possible? And with every individual student that we try to move in that direction, it's just an individual-based decision. So I can't tell you why, I don't have an answer for why aren't we 100% inclusion, other than that is a process that we're continuing to try to increase that percentage, and that we're doing it on the individual student level to make sure that we are pushing students to give them the greatest extent possible. I can also say that, well, I've had today's my first day at the board office this week because I've been in schools all week doing allocation meetings. And I share that because the conversation has been specific to how do we change the outcomes and kind of what has special ed done for our kids. And so in the context of that, I can tell you that when I hear people talking about adding direct to services and wanting teachers to teach direct, which will be a pull-out class, that we are pivoting that conversation to what other supports can we put in place while that student accesses instruction in the regular ed classroom. So the vision is to prime the pump per se, to definitely push and have a structure that pushes as many students into the regular ed class, even beginning in the fall. And we are right now in the moment building master schedules and looking at allocations in that space. So will we arrive at 100% in the fall? I'm not going to stand here and tell you yes, but can I tell you that looking at pushing as many students into regular ed as much as possible, that is a vision, that is a passion that we're doing, and we're starting with those direct classes. And while we also look at some of those students served and adapted and pushing them out at least for part of the day, even with paraprofessional support, so they can have that experience as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to, I've always been curious about that and have thought about it more so recently, particularly with the pandemic. And I know we lost students who were served through special education, and just trying to figure out how do we work to decrease that segregated, experience, to the degree that depends on us. And if we are moving towards that, way, or if that is sort of the underlying goal, sharing that with the board, like what we can do, like I ask because I don't know if it's a financial thing, I'm sure it has financial implications, I would imagine, but if that is a goal, or if that is the goal and the ultimate mission, I understand it doesn't happen overnight and maybe not even within like a couple of years, but just figuring out what we can do, or what I can do as a board member, what individuals can do as a board member to support that, so that our students, they share the same spaces when they can, and and learn from each other, and at the same time have the supports they need to meet their own individual needs.
Right, agreed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now at the mall tab. Oh, discussion. I was thinking presentation, but I know we have a lot of information, and there's sorting through a lot. You know, I want to start off opening the floor and maybe inviting first Dr. Anderson, Ms. Davis, Mr. Pruitt, Mr. Schooneman, Dr. Hooker, if there's any additional information or like any type of synthesized summary that we can share publicly. We have a lot of different and moving pieces as we talk about the mall area TAD. And so this is just space for discussion at some point. Right now, we're thinking next week, but perhaps at some point we will need to take action on something.
Yeah, and the something is to extend the school district's participation in the TAD from 2040 through 2053. And just to sort of back up, so the resolution that was passed in, I think it was September of 21, said that it was just sort of a general commitment for the district to participate in a mall area TAD. There was no specific project at that time. And the end date would be December 31st, 2040. Now, for this specific project, the developer has asked and has basically said that to generate the funds that they feel they need from the TAD, that won't happen through 2040. They want it for a 30-year period, which I think is the maximum the law allows, and that would take them through 2053. So that means for that to happen, the district would have to agree to amend its intergovernmental agreement with the mayor and commission with Athens-Clarke County to allow that.
Thank you. Ms. Hall.
I would just like to put out there for my colleagues that do not know and for the record that I will not be participating in this discussion or vote for a possible conflict of interest because I do own property that is in that area, although it is not a part of the project. So I did not want to appear distant or disinterested, but to put that out there.
Thank you for sharing that, Ms. Hall.
Can I just, so I've been trying to
Dr. Yeager?
follow all the emails and I haven't been to any of the meetings. Is it, what we're going to decide is if we're going to approve the extension? We can't back out of the original agreement. We've already agreed to it, right?
That's right.
But it's the extension that we would
That's
be
right,
voting on.
but the extension is critical, so that's.
I see.
So that.
According to the builder? Or
According to the builder, according
yeah.
to the developer.
Okay.
So maybe it would be helpful just to give a little timeline and status update of where we are. Everything is having to move very fast, and it's being driven by the fact that the developer says that their option to buy the property runs out at the end of this month, and they want to have these things decided before they buy the property. So, so the schedule is the mark that Dr. Anderson and Ms. Davis are on, along with the mayor and 2 commission members. That committee has to approve what's called a community benefits agreement, and this is the document that Atlanta Council hired by Athens-Clarke County, Dan McCray, is working on tonight, I'm sure, as we speak, as he is every night for the last few nights, I believe. So the MARC will vote on that Monday. Assuming they approve it, it will go to the mayor and commission on Tuesday, and assuming they approve it, then the last step would be for this board to approve that extension on Thursday, which would be the last piece needed for the project to go forward. It has, I guess maybe it's sort of 2 pieces, I suppose, which is the financial impact on the schools, on the school district, and then just the project feasibility, community benefit, and all of that, which the board here may or may not be interested in. You may want to analyze that. You may want to defer to Athens-Clarke County and let the mayor and commission decide if it's something that the community should do. The financial impact, I think you've seen the analysis that Mr. Schooneman sent. So The estimate is this project would add 221 students to Athens, Clarke County. That's based on pretty broad level, just how many students are there divided by number of housing units. It could vary a lot from that, and I think everybody acknowledges that. Again, taking it just at a very high level, the school district gets $7,354 in local revenues, property taxes for each student it has. So if you agree to a 30-year TAD, then that means that for 30 years, you will have 221 students, give or take, that you're not getting that increased revenue for. So if you just do the math, that's a shortfall of a little over $1.6 million a year. So I guess, and I actually went back and looked at it, so this was, I was there for the mayor and commission meeting, but if you didn't watch the meeting on video or weren't there, I think Mayor Gertz would probably want me to pass or want somebody to pass this along. Sort of his summation was that while, and I tried to write it down word for word, while this specific project would produce some cost to the school district in the near term, and whether it's just the near term or longer, I mean, that depends on a lot of variables. When you look at the overall tax digest, this community is producing so much new construction that doesn't bear any cost for the district in terms of its mission space. I would ask our partners to consider that overall environment. And specifically, he was referencing right before that things like the Mark and the Standard and the new apartments on West Broad Street that are, you know, pretty high-end UGA student apartment complexes, basically, that do produce a lot of tax revenue and don't produce K-12 students. So for whatever it's worth, and not saying whether it is or isn't, I would like to pass that on because I thought that was a valid comment, and I want to help Mayor Gertz get that out. As far as sort of the underlying feasibility analysis, it sort of, I think it started out with the idea that there would be enough detail and verification that they would actually be able to issue bonds to pre-fund the TAD. Early in January, I received a call from one of the developer representatives saying that would not be the case. We still thought there would be a feasibility study. Athens Clarke County hired an analyst to do that. But then at the Mark committee meeting on Monday, again, the developer representative said, let me not mess this up and look at my notes, that basically we can't tell you where the project's financially viable until we go to market, but having the TAD in hand will help us. And he sort of clarified Tuesday night for the mayor and commission that, you know, that means that they really, I think they're looking for this as the first piece rather than the last piece, and then they'll be putting the financing together. So Mr. McRae has really done a stellar job of trying to react to all of this, and so he's putting together a community benefits agreement that will structure this to work over time, and basically will have some deadlines and targets and benchmarks that they would have to meet, and if they don't, then the mayor and commission would have the option of terminating that agreement. As far as how money's dispersed, he's proposed a third-party expert to analyze the requests for TAD money from the developers as they come. It would be on a reimbursement basis, and you know, one of the issues is they've actually upped their request to $189 million of TAD money, which is about, at their estimate, about 29% of total project cost. Which is a variation actually from the mayor and commission's original TAD guidelines, which capped it at 15% with some room for exception. Another variation, just as an aside, the mayor and commission guidelines were for 20% affordable housing units out of the total. They only want to do 10%. They say that's all that's financially viable. So a lot is going to have to happen over the weekend. Mr. McRae is hoping to have a draft to the developers tomorrow for them to look at. There's little time for negotiation because Ms. Davis and Dr. Anderson will be over there at 1 o'clock Monday to vote on this. So that's where we are.
Thank you for that overview. Mr. Evans? Oh, okay, Ms. Davis?
Well, I watched that whole thing, and I have some real problems with some things. The first is that this, all of a sudden, this is a giant emergency that we do this now, right? You're asking us to take $1.6 million a year from our kids, correct? Is that what I'm understanding, right? And I'm trying to think about the benefit to the kids on the east side of this, because I heard about Halo and money and all this other stuff, but I mean, my east side kids still don't have a library. I mean, Tim's gonna have this town hall and a library that if my people wanna go to, they're gonna have to take 2 buses to get there. It's not right, it's not fair. So, you know, while I understand that the mall is this giant blight over there on the west side, we need to think about equity. I mean, we've been talking about that a great deal here today, and yet all of a sudden, you go across the river and, well, so what, y'all? And so I've got some real issues with that. I got some real issues with this timeline where you guys are maybe get a document on Friday that you're going to get 2 days to look at, right? Saturday and Sunday, then you're going to come in on Monday at 1 o'clock and vote for something that we're going to get locked into for what would be my 8th term sitting here on the school board. Yeah, I'm going for it. I'm telling you. I'm staying. I ain't going nowhere. I'm like a tick. I'm dug in. But, you know,
you still won't beat Mr. Payne.
There's just so many problems and issues here. Like, you know, we don't know what the CBA is going to be. We don't know what this is. We don't know what that is, right? I mean, I feel like we're walking into some sort of disaster, and that we can totally avoid by just being like, well, why don't we just be patient? Okay? And if the mall's got another buyer, okay. I don't know who that would be.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, please.
Just clarifying. They don't have another buyer, but the seller is going to keep their earnest money and pull out of the deal, and they've already put $1 million of earnest money into the contract. So he's going to walk away and keep their $1 million earnest money, and that's the real rub here. And once that happens, then the entire thing falls through, and whether or not they can start this whole process all over again after investing, I think they said $2-point-something million in the development phase of this up until this point, is what they're worried about. So it's not necessarily that they've created an emergency, it's that the timeline that it took to develop all of this plan. And if you remember, they had originally, with another architect or firm, they had developed a plan that the community did not like or approve of. And so they went back to the drawing board and hired new architect or a new firm to develop a new plan. And so this process has been 2 years in the making, and now they've run upon the point where the seller of the property is saying, I'm done.
And I'll add to that, they have a plan that the planning department has approved, which is major for anybody trying to do business with Athens Clarke County government. And so going forward with that plan, I'm just not as complicated as you guys are or as in-depth in terms of your numbers, but I'm going from a vote that this board said, yeah, we're just going to give them something, and so we're going to support this TAD. We knew up front that there was no project for that TAD. We know that we are supporting one of 6 TADs that the county is participating in, 3 of which I think are on the east side. And so when I look at it, I'm not looking at it from the standpoint of anything except the redevelopment of the mall. And so the redevelopment of the mall is a planned, pretty much residential construction development. It's a residential site, what it's ultimately going to be, with that a little bit more retail than you normally would see. So that portion of the mall that is built stays. and then pretty much the two ends. So if you've seen the picture, it's a beautiful transformation for that area. The fact that they went from 142,000, I believe, to 189,000, those are the numbers. It's like a 50
Million.
I'm sorry, 50 million, excuse me. It's a $50 million difference, and then this is all play money to me, right? We might as well be talking about cryptocurrency. But literally, that can't be the thing that stops us, right? Because what they're talking about, and the reality is, if you look at those areas where you have done this type of transformational project, Attorney Hall is absolutely correct. We're going to get our money from the halo effect from all of those areas around it, where we are getting 100% of our 60% of the tax revenue generated from that development, and also the reappraisal of properties in the area. So you have to look at for me, I'm not going to tell you what you have to do. I'm looking at the picture as a whole. And I'm also, again, I'm a good person because I literally experienced these things. So when Jack R. Wells went from an undesirable property, Paldo, to now Columbia Brookside, which is absolutely beautiful and transformative for that area, it took them 3 years to raise my taxes. And I appealed it once. And so I'm like, you did all of that in my backyard or my front yard, really. But you didn't touch my street. And so, no, I didn't get 5G. I didn't get anything. And so they came out and they paved a couple of roads, and so I got a 37% tax increase that I had to pay this year. And so the money is real from that perspective, but nothing happens if you don't build it. And so the thing that we're being asked to do is extend our agreement to support the TAD from 20 years to 30 years. Some of you will be here. I probably won't. And so I have no problem voting for that extension because it's still so far out in the future. God only knows what's going to happen in that time. And so I'm not going to hedge my bet on that. The other thing was, again, just to approve the agreement. And I know that these developers, actually, full disclosure, one of the developers is a relative. We're distant relatives. But I know his work. And so I am confident that we should be able to get some things out of here that are beneficial for our district. And I would hope that this conversation would turn to what would you see or need for us to see in this agreement that we could possibly ask for within the definition of a TAD and fundable projects from that developer.
May I just jump in and say at that point, please remember the time frame. So again, Mr. McCrae's putting that together with some things that as a matter of fact, there were some emails. A number of you had asked about the possibility of a set aside for some of those affordable housing units for Clark County School District employees. I talked to Mr. McCrae today, and he's going to try to do that. Got to figure out the way to word it in the legal way, but if possible. There's not much time to do a lot more editing and adding to this, so just keep that in mind.
So I'm going to be asking if we can get something just between us and the developer outside of the TAD. That'll be next. You ready? Thanks.
Mr. Evans, and I think I saw Mr. Denson, or no? Okay.
I'm again, just, I'm sorry about their earnest money, but that's an issue, not an ish me.
No, I was just
Okay.
explaining. I
Yeah,
wasn't justifying.
I know, but
It's just context.
Again, I feel for the contractor, but you are asking us to do a lot, and you're not giving us any time to really to think about it and be a deliberative body. That's why we're here. We're a deliberative body, and I haven't really seen anything that makes me go, yeah, that's good for my folks at Fowler. I haven't seen that yet. Now, I would love to be wrong. I absolutely would. I would love that, we take this $1.6 million and it turns in, and we get, a 4 Starbucks and a whatever in there. I mean, that would be great. But I don't know. It just seems awfully rushed, and I don't like to be rushed when it comes to making really big decisions that we will be tied to for the next 30 years. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Denson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think one important thing for us to think about when we're going through this, that is it is $1.6 million a year, but it's $1.6 million that won't exist unless we do this. So it's not, if we don't do this, we're not losing out on, we don't have $1.6 million we're playing with. That money only exists if this is seen through fruition. Manager Blaine Williams has the saying, it's like, this only because of, or but for this project, we would have $1.6 million additional money that we will then invest into this TAD that can kind of create these outcomes. And I definitely am supportive of this. I mean, just because it is going to be, and we've all been to the mall, right? We know that it's a problem, I would say, and that this design, if seen to fruition, will create 1,100 housing units right now in a town that is in a housing crisis because of overarching demand and extremely low supply being the biggest factor. And yes, the county is asking for 20% of those units to be affordable, and the developer is coming back at saying just 10%. But an important component of this is the way our inclusionary housing, the ACC inclusionary housing agreement works is that housing is affordable for 20 years. What the developer is saying is while they'll only do 10%, they'll do 10% of that housing affordable for 40 years, doubling the term. So you get the same number of years, just only on one number of only on 10% of the units. So over the 30 years, you're ending up with still like, or 40 years, you're ending up still with the same amount of housing opportunities as you would. And of course also a public transit transfer station that does not exist and that desperately is needed over there at the mall so that our buses can actually run all the way to the county line on the west side is desperately needed, and that will be also funded through this program, along with multi-use trails, sidewalks, green space, the Boys and Girls Club space, in which they're talking about giving space to that would be valued at $1.2 million. So there is a lot of things that I think that our community definitely gets out of this, and to me it's worth the investment. And that's the way I think that it's the best to think about these TADs, is it's an investment. And it's an investment that would only exist if we do it. All that being said, I do think that the school district is not getting enough direct benefit out of this. I think a lot of this stuff is indirect benefits that are huge and fantastic on their own, but I think because that 60% of the overall property taxes are taxes that the school district would take, that I think we need to have more direct benefit involved in this. And I know I sent out an email to all of y'all proposing that similar to what has happened with the Boys and Girls Club space, in which they are building out the space and then providing it for drastically reduced rent for the 30 years, that we do a similar, we request a similar thing to happen with a child care center, because while it's going to create 221 new students, a lot of those students are going to be under the age of 4 and and infants and such at times too. And right now we have a great need for more child care spaces in this community. Every single place has waiting lists. We don't have not even half of what we need. I mean, I think that's one thing we could do in a very similar fashion of what they've already provided for the Boys and Girls Club space. And my understanding is that the mayor and commission think this is something that's doable that could be added into the CBA within our small timeline. And that I think that at this time we have the leverage to try to increase the benefits that our school district and our students are going to be able to get. So that is my recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Denson. Dr. Anderson, Ms. Davis, and then Dr. Okay. Ms. Davis and Dr. Yeager.
So thank you very much for that, Tim, because I think the other thing here is this developer has an affection for the Boys and Girls Club. We are in the process of working with this Boys and Girls Club, right, on our workforce development initiatives.
Yeah.
And so I am really excited about the possibility of looking for apprenticeships during this construction phase. We have an opportunity to launch our CTAE pathway for that. And I think it would be exciting to have that conversation with this developer about doing that. I can see bricklayers, I can see cement finishers, I can see electricians, the things that you're going to see when the district goes to Tuscaloosa in their career academy. So this is an opportunity, and I hope we won't miss that opportunity to have that conversation with them about apprenticeships and whatever else they might want to offer in terms of this. I've also heard people talk about what's the commitment to minority developers. These are minority developers. And so, bam, they already got credit with the state and the federal government in terms of that. So I'm excited about that. So, yeah, I think it's definitely an opportunity. Even though we can't get it maybe in the CBA, that's definitely being written right now. When I spoke with their attorney at one of our meetings, he seemed very receptive to us asking for things that they might be able to do to make this work well for all of us.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Dr. Yeager, and then Dr. Anderson.
Quick question that might wake up Mr. Gilbreth. This is an area that's zoned for Cleveland Road, right? And where is Cleveland Road in terms of capacity?
Under.
It's
Under.
under capacity. So this is opportunity to send those 220 kids to a school that could use 220 kids. Is that true? Or, I mean, I forget. I know I've been part of some discussions in the past about numbers and which schools we need to try to grow. And
Of those 221 students, we're not assuming all of those will attend Cleveland Road. We're talking about Clark Middle, Clark Central, the West Side. We don't know BHL as well. We're not sure how many will attend Cleveland Road. It could be 20 students at Cleveland. We don't know that.
okay.
I think I'm more concerned about that halo effect.
Let me circle back to Dr. Anderson, and then we'll come back to Ms. Davis. Dr. Yeager, was that did you complete your question? Or?
I guess it was just thinking about zones and thinking about the different elementaries and which ones we are losing students in and whether this was in that category. And so it would be beneficial even if we had to pay more for these kids, at least they would be filling a school that we could use more students at.
And may I just jump in? I don't, the 1.6 million could be a little misleading. I mean, that's just multiplying the estimated number of new students by the average property tax revenue. So, I mean, even assuming that's a meaningful number and has some meaning, but could be a lot of variation in it, depending on things like, do we already have that capacity? And the other thing is that, yes, I mean, the major offset would be the halo effect, which means the increased property taxes, hopefully from revitalization around the TAD area. If it's successful, there would certainly be some of that would offset that annual figure. To what extent, again, you know, nobody could predict that at this stage.
Sure. Thank you. Before, I think it was Dr. Anderson and then Mr. Evans, I saw Mr. Schoeneman had his hand up.
One thing that Mr. Denson had brought or had talked about, it kind of sparked something. In 2020, when we were originally going through this analysis, I received from the tax assessor's office the value of the mall area TAD for the last 10 years. And just keep in mind, the value has been decreasing year after year after year. So from 2011 to 2020, the value of the property decreased by $19.7 million, or 18% over that 10 years. So when you're thinking about the net cost of those additional 231 kids, keep in mind also that the amount of tax revenue coming from this TAD going into investing in our students will also be decreasing if this area is not redeveloped.
Yeah, that's the one thing that, is it okay? Yeah, that's the one thing that I kind of tried to focus my energy on, rather than the financial feasibility piece, which I think is gray at best, was that if this area is not developed, it will continue to decrease in value, and that is less revenue, tax revenue going to our kids. But the other thing that I tried to stick to at the last meeting, again, as they're discussing financial feasibility, was that they did move to the pay-go model. So there's no loss to our taxpayers at this moment if they start developing tomorrow. They're fronting that whole cost until they start building those units and actually have renters move in, or, have the property reassessed at a higher tax value. So at this point in time, what they're saying is, let us spend $70 million up front, and then if we build it, they will come. And I don't see as much of a risk as I did before when they were trying to do the bond model. I don't see as much of a risk to taxpayers now as I did 2 weeks ago. But there is still, to me, a lot of gray area into the financial feasibility and the ask of 29% of this project being invested by taxpayers rather than the developers. That part is a little bit sketchy to me. But that pay-go model did help me sort of adjust my thinking, in that it's going to be really difficult for them as developers to walk away from this project after investing $70 million into it. They got to figure out how to finish it. Otherwise, the money's a wash.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, and then Ms. Davis.
I'm just really scared, mostly because there is just so much that we're going to give up. Once we say yes, we lose our leverage. That's it. So if we're going to have asks, we need to ask now. We are in a position of strength. Once we sign on the dotted line next week, we don't have it anymore. And then everything, like right now, I mean, you go try to buy a car. Man, that guy will sell you everything. He'll tell you it will do everything. All right, but then once you sign and you drive it off the lot, and all of a sudden the hubcaps fall off, that's a whole lot of you. That's my fear, right? Yeah, I want everything. I want the daycare. I want ACCA kids over there, right? I want internships. I want it all. But we're not going to get the time to ask for that.
We can. I mean, they're already having discussions about including Ccsd employees in that 10% of affordable housing units. So I think if there is a moment to ask for these things, this is the moment. Because that community benefits agreement, they're going to be held to that community benefits agreement before any checks get cut to them, right? And so they have an obligation to fulfill whatever is in that benefits agreement if they want their 29% funding for this project. So that's where our leverage is, and we can talk to them right now.
So are we prepared to hold the line then if that stuff isn't in there?
It's up to the board.
I mean, if our asks, right, daycare center, ACCA internships, right, 10% housing for our teachers so that way we can recruit and retain. If that stuff is not in there this weekend, do we tell them no?
I have some thoughts. Ms. Davis, I think your hand was up first.
Well, again, this is our first time having a conversation about asks, so I'll defer to Mike, but I'm also willing to make a phone call and say, these are the things that the board is talking about, and if I'm not mistaken, I'm sure they're listening to this, or will before long, so that they'll have a clue as to where we are. But this is our first time having a voice in terms of the board speaking into what we want out of this agreement. So I wouldn't sell them short. If they've been negotiating all this time, I don't think you get to the last 2 days and all of a sudden, oh, dig a hole in the ground and say, oh, I'm gonna throw it all away because of that. But the other piece of that is, you know, we are in the business of educating children. And so, yes, I think we have to be cognizant of that is our role. And in terms of how these funds get spent, the board has already committed that we will give up the incremental gains in taxes, not our base taxes, where are we locked at 2020, or when is the baseline established for what we do, the taxes we get? Was it when we sign the intergovernmental agreement, or will it happen when they start?
Yeah, the baseline is, I believe, the 2020 tax year.
Okay.
So the increment will be the addition over that year.
So are they already collecting the increment into the government's TAD fund? No.
No.
Okay, so it won't happen until we approve this TAD project.
Correct.
But yet we've spent 2 years, right?
Yeah.
So that might, I'm curious.
Actually, I said 2020, maybe 21. I think it's probably, now that I think about it, it's probably the 21 tax year, because it's the year that the mayor and commission and the Board of Education approved that intergovernmental agreement and the TAD resolution.
Okay, so good. So again, we're talking about, it's not like we get zero taxes. We're just frozen at what it was in 2021 for 30 years. That's what we're talking about.
So I had
And
a
the
couple.
pay-as-you-go is the last thing. So they're paying and we're reimbursing. So they're calling it pay-go. So again, the risk to us only occurs if they default in some way and can't deliver. So otherwise, the money just goes back, I guess, into the TAD fund. So I'm working my way through getting the risk minimum down in my thinking. So I'm anxious to see if there are any other thoughts.
I was going to say, I know we were sort of in different places when we voted for this originally. It is rather peculiar to me that the organization is already selected, the Boys and Girls Club. We have a lot of nonprofits and organizations in Athens. And I don't know, Mr. Denson, you may be able to speak to this, but when this project came forward, when the board said we agree to this, there was not a call put out necessarily for developers, like with ideas, or was it? Do you?
The way this works is that anybody could put forward a proposal, development proposal.
Okay.
And this is the only one. I mean, this is amazingly ambitious, so I think, obviously, you're only going to get this because they have the ability to do so. But yeah, anybody could have done so. Now, the Boys and Girls Club being added into it, I agree, it's a little peculiar. I think that was definitely,
And I
Ms.
think
Davis
it's
put it.
great, right?
It is,
It goes
but I
back
think
to
that
my
was like
earlier
a
point.
relationship already that existed there, so that's
Yeah.
why. But yeah, that wasn't part of it at all. But yeah, anybody can put it forward, and then the commission will consider it. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do want to reiterate, I think it's great to have a Boys and Girls Club on that side of town, because I think all of these organizations are certainly worthy of being a part of, significant efforts. But I think there's some concern. I sort of feel like we're here. It's like now that we're here, I didn't necessarily want to be here, but now that we are here, I think that there are some things that, there are some concerns, and maybe those concerns might be able to be turned into solutions with what we're asking for. The concerns I have are affordable housing. I don't know how we determine affordable housing. Just about every place in Athens that claims to have affordable housing is not affordable for my cousins, aunts, uncles, and neighbors. And so I'm very concerned. It's great because I understand that we are a diverse community, and any type of help or support or subsidy is helpful, but I don't know what that means for people who are struggling and cannot afford to live in Athens. It's like, I just have concerns. I think it's the fear, as you've mentioned, who is this for and who is it going to benefit? Ultimately, you know, we have some things that we may be able to ask for as a community and financially in the future. And I think that's good, but it's the affordable housing. And then I think it's great that they extended it, I think from 20 to 40 years, was it? It's a 40-year cap on affordable. But then what happens after 40 years? I do know that, or I think that a lot of things happen in 40 years, and so who knows, like, what that will look, you know, what that area will look like. But that's a concern as well. Also, that we don't know the feasibility. Earlier in our conversation, we were talking about financial costs, right? About major decisions and how much it costs. And we are going into a decision that says, like, we're going to trust you, we're going to work collaboratively and trust that this plan is actually going to come to fruition. So I do think that there's that element of not knowing. I do think it's some checks and balances maybe in place. And then the other piece is we are sort of being asked to help support this, right? Although the developers, they take the risk up front. But then, you know, any additional tax revenue that we have will go to support this. But it goes back to then we are supporting investors, which is fine, but then how do they invest in our businesses? Our small businesses that we have in Athens, our local businesses, our minority businesses. I think it's great that they are considered, I think it was minority businesses. It's great. And how do we, like, minimize the outliers? We have businesses in Athens, we have, like, families, we have people that have all of these different, that are entrepreneurs who often are locked out of contracts and services. And so I guess ultimately those are my concerns, but then how do we ask that within a matter of days? You know, we don't have our diversity, it's not the diversity survey, disparity survey. You know, I know they're working very hard to get that information, and I think Mayor and Commission has also started down that route. But, you know, I think I can, of course, go with the will of the board, but I hope that there are some specific things that we ask. And I can't help but not see some of the same concerns that were raised earlier that are here. And so those are my thoughts. Talk about things being rushed and not having, you know, the process being rushed. And while this has happened, you know, we've been talking about this for years, it is still a timeline that's imposed on us, you know? And so I can't help but wonder, you know, if it's okay here, why, you know, when are these things okay?
When is what now?
When are these problems okay to have?
Oh.
And so, again, you know, if we must be here, I think figuring out what we ask for and being very clear about what we ask for. And noting that I don't think there are any I don't know that there's teeth to the CBA. I mean, can we so what do we do? Let's just say if we ask for internships or we ask for a percentage of small and local businesses, there's no oversight committee here, right? You all are not an oversight committee.
Well, they've agreed to have, I don't know if it's an individual or a team of people who oversee the community benefits agreement and its involvement with the TAD money specifically to make sure that whatever reimbursement checks are cut, so they front the money, the TAD, whatever, the reimbursement process then starts. So there's a group or person overseeing that process to ensure that each reimbursement is tied directly to the TAD money, but specifically to what's in the community benefits agreement. So there is a sort of safety measure in place to make sure that that does happen. And if it's not, then they just don't get reimbursed for whatever it is that they've done at that point in time.
And over and above that, part of the structure Mr. McCray has come up with is that any default in any of the commitments that the developer makes in the community benefits agreement, of course, after due notice and period of cure and all of that, but if it remains a default, it entitles the mayor and commission to terminate the agreement in addition to whatever other legal.
Can you say that again? Like you said, it begins to be up to the mayor and commission to terminate the agreement?
Yeah, yeah. Those are the checks and balances that are being built into it, and that's, I mean, there are any number of legal remedies you could have for, you know, a default or a breach of contract, but probably the biggest one, at least for as it's being built out, will be if commitments and targets and benchmarks aren't met, the mayor and commission can just say this isn't working out, it's terminated.
And that committee, the person who will oversee that is put in place by the mayor and commission or the developers?
It's going to be a contractor.
Well,
I believe it's the mayor and commission, right?
so that's sort of a sub-item. So the mayor and commission ultimately enforces all aspects of the community benefits agreement. There's a little add-in piece for determining that TAD money is spent on TAD eligible items, and that's where there'll be a third party, perhaps a bank or somebody that has expertise in these matters that will be sort of like having the architect check off on the payment applications before you pay him when you're constructing a project.
I just want to add that this development has, I don't remember how many thousands of square feet of retail space when you were talking about the small businesses. So the Boys and Girls Club isn't going to be the only thing in the mall, nor will Belk's be the only thing in the mall. There's space for restaurants, there's space for a build-out of pretty much a live, work, play environment. And so some of the questions that you're asking may be answered by a business's ability or willingness or interest in occupying some of that space as well. So I don't want us to rethink the plan that's been approved by the county, because that's the main thing, is getting the planning done. And I don't want us to ignore that this plan has been presented publicly. It has been presented to the planning department. Commissioner Hull had a meeting at the mall with the community to come out and express their interest in this plan. This plan has been approved by the initial TAD approval committee, and it has already gone through the planning department, so it's been approved by them. That's probably the biggest hurdle. And it sounds like the mayor and commission wants to support it, and so the only question for us is, do we want to support it? And so both of us have the same amount of risk involved in terms of the things that I'm hearing us talk about now. It's just good to have them discussed and put out on the table for consideration.
Yes, I've had an opportunity to look at the information from Tuesday or Wednesday, I think it was, at the mayor and commission meeting and Tuesday. Oh, okay. Yeah, was it Tuesday? Oh, okay. Okay.
Normal work
And so-
session on Tuesday.
Okay, so that's where I listened in and saw the development, and so I understand that conceptually and theoretically. Exactly. And so that is what I'm saying then. I think, what does that mean? What does that translate to? As
Field
far
of
as what we're
dreams.
asking, what we're asking
Build it
for.
and they will come. And no one has anything more than that. So, I mean, they started out with, we don't have those answers for you, right? Feasibility, we don't know. This is our best guess, and this is what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so absent that, we have nothing, and I'm kind of there.
Well, I mean, that's why they went to the that's why they've gone to the pay-go model, because they don't have those answers. And so it makes it easier for them to figure those answers out or make adjustments along the way, because they are financing it up front. So, anyway.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear any of that. I'm so sorry.
I was just saying that's why they went to the pay-go model, so that because there are no answers that we're looking for. And so it gives them the opportunity, if they're financing it up front, to create those answers as they go along, rather than having that heavy oversight that is attached to the bond.
Mr. Denson?
Thank you. And yeah, speaking to the, the feasibility and the risk, I really don't see us really shouldering hardly any risk because of the PAYGO model. I think it helps a lot. And then also within the intergovernmental agreement we already passed, and that will still be standing after this. Let me see, what part of it is it? Article 3, Section 3.12, it says that if the redevelopment area has not received new construction and development within a taxable 100% fair market value of at least $1 million by the date which is 5 years from the effective date hereof, this agreement shall terminate. So, I mean, that is correct, Attorney Pruitt. So I mean, right there, if this is not feasible and shows it's not feasible and they don't do what they're supposed to do, this agreement dissolves and we are not on the hook for anything. So we are kind of only in it if it's successful, which is great. And I think, Dr. Gant, you bring up like the question or the problems. I think as you put it, like, when is it okay to have these problems? I think it's a good way to think about it. I guess the way I'm thinking about it is the alternative to this isn't a reality where those problems don't exist. Those problems already exist in this area. I mean, this area is one that's blight, honestly, in a lot of ways, and that is actually exasperating problems when it comes to stormwater and lack of housing and lack of affordability for even retailers and such. So like the current reality is, I think, full of problems, and I think that the potential reality with this, while definitely not perfect, helps in those problems more than the current reality is. So I think that's the way that's the reason I think I'm supporting this. It's definitely not perfect. I wish we could take more and more attempts at it, but the timing is what it is, and that sucks. We're just kind of stuck in a situation. I guarantee you the developer is also not happy that they are put on this timeline either. And then the last thing I just want to answer is like the affordable housing. What does that mean? That is baked into this. That it would be based on 80% of the area median income, so that only a person could live in those affordable housing units only if they have documentation showing with their income tax that they are 80% of the area in Athens income. And so they can't lease it to anybody higher than that. So that way, and as reevaluated every year, so that basically for these 40 years, even if the average income goes up, it's always gonna be based on that percentage, so, yeah.
With that income, but that's not just Athens, that's like the Athens area, right?
It's the Athens metro area.
Yeah,
which,
and so that includes some pretty significant, I'm guessing here, I don't have any facts.
Oconee County skews it, but it also only skews it a few percentage points because it also takes into account Oglethorpe County, Madison County, some counties that actually have lower area median income than we do. But Oconee County definitely skews it some.
But let's be clear that it's still like double the Athens proper average median income. So, I mean, let's not confuse that, because Athens median income is what, 38,000, something like that. The area median income is about 60,000. So it's
62.
still about double.
Yeah.
My numbers may be a little bit off, but it's still substantially higher in the area median income. Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean, like, I don't have the perspective that, because still someone could benefit, right? Still. Who will be the administrator over the affordable housing? Will that, be the developers or whoever they sell it to, or is it?
It'll be a joint of the Housing and Community Development Director, along with the ACC Manager's Office, and then they also have to they can also find a third entity that's already an affordable housing provider, such as the Housing Authority or Land Trust or something like that, to be the one that comes through and checks and makes sure, yeah.
And has that already been determined quite yet, or not? Like who that third party will be, or that third person will be with
No, but
HCD?
it'd be required before they can move forward, because that's all baked into the inclusionary housing ordinance that they have to agree to.
So will that be in the community, the CBA, Mike?
The last I saw today is that actually, so there's a part of the CBA that's the land use restriction agreement. The last I heard today is that there actually won't be a third party. If I understood it correctly, it'll be the Athens, not the Housing Authority, but the Housing Department Division of the mayor of Athens, Clarke County that'll oversee
They'll
that.
probably outsource it to somebody else. But can I just say this too? Because I think the thing that was most impactful to me on Tuesday night was when I think it was the attorney for the developer spoke. He spoke to he actually gave numbers in terms of the billions of dollars that these developers are bringing to the table of projects that were successful. So we're not talking about somebody who's just getting started. We're talking about people that are very proficient in what they do. And so I left with a real strong sense that, yeah, these aren't people who are going to be asking us to come back for money. They actually have the way to generate their money to do this work, especially on a pay-as-you-go basis. So, I mean, the fact that they're not asking anybody to put money up front but themselves tells me a whole lot. And I hope that increases your confidence in the deal getting done.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. Evans?
It actually doesn't, because if they've got it, then why don't they just do it? What do they need us for? You know, I know, exactly, right. But if they've got this money and they've got all this up front, you know, and they've done this for years, let them do it. I don't understand why they need to come to us for this.
Because we have a TAD.
Well, I get it. We have a TAD, right? But again, the underlying is like, why, if they've got it and if it's going to be pay as you go, what do they need us for?
May I
Just
answer that,
go
at
and
least the
do
legal
it.
part of that? That's the but-for test that a tax allocation district has to meet, that redevelopment of the area would not be financially feasible for an investor, but for TAD funding, that it would not cash flow and give a return that anyone would invest in, but for that.
I think so. Just to be clear, there are some asks, and hopefully I would imagine the person who is working on it will hear and figure out what is feasible.
Well, yeah, I was going to, if you don't mind, I was just going to clarify. So what I've heard is the priority for CCSD employees, however that could be done for the affordable housing. Mr. Denson's suggestion for space and for daycare or whatever it might be. I was just going to throw out, I don't know, but it sort of responded that there are some things that the ACC could do with that space that the district might not be able to do. So one option might be to have an option for CCSD, assuming they agree to that space, that if there's something that it would need to be assigned, we could assign our rights to ACC so they could do it for us. And then the last one I heard is internships for students, which we've asked for in some projects before.
Yes, I think so. And I don't know that I don't know that there was a consensus. And it's okay if it's not. I just want to say them. I think there has to be a plan for our local and minority businesses. Like, how will they be a part of such a major development? And I don't know how this even translates to an ask in the community development, the community benefit agreement. But I just want to reiterate that the formula that is used for affordable housing is not going to be affordable. And I don't know what that means. I don't know if you ask them to go back and change it or what, but this will not be affordable for some of the people who actually do not have housing. I mean, it's going to be affordable for someone, and I know that ends up being a numbers thing because the numbers may not work out, but I just wanted, I don't know how that translates to an ask, Mr. Pruitt, and I don't want to assume even that it's a consensus here, but I do just want to say that. I don't know where I'll fall on this next week, but I certainly I do feel that that community benefits agreement will be helpful for us all to take a look at. Mr. Denson.
So one option that we could do for our ask is the way the inclusionary housing ordinance is written is that there is, normally it is that you would do 20% at AMI or 10% at 60% of AMI. If you're going to a smaller percentage, the discount had to be larger. So, I mean, at least it could be at least an ask that we say, well, if you're going to keep this at 10%, then we ask you to go to the lower AMI number of 60%.
Now, I think that that was a part of some discussion. I don't know if it was in our MARC meeting or elsewhere, but the rub there, and this is where the financial stuff is kind of like, what? And we're like, well, then we would need more than $189 million. So then it gets back to the financial feasibility question.
Yeah, I figured that it would circle back around to numbers, but I would think that even if there are lesser units, but people that really need housing, and I mean, I'm talking about if we had to triage individuals, that at least those individuals could have a place to, they could access this, so.
I will certainly convey all of that, and I think you and the mayor and commission are probably in the same place. I mean, the developers will have to make their last and best offer, and then that will be what is considered by the mayor and commission Tuesday and you Thursday.
Any additional feedback or thoughts? And I don't want to put Ms. Butts on the spot. She does know that she can chime in, but I just, anything else from anyone? Thank you so much. All right, so we will move forward to the financial report.
Can I request a short break? We've been here for 3 hours.
Yes.
3 hours and 20 minutes.
Oh, yeah, we have. Okay, yeah, let's take a break and we'll resume at 9:30. It's 9:22 p.m. Schoeneman. Okay, all right, it is actually 9:31, so we're going to resume, and we are at item 9, and this is our financial report.
Well, good evening. Here before you, you've got the financial statements through period 6, so that's halfway through the year. We're 50% done. The first document you're looking at is our schedule of revenues. I'd like to draw your eye to the red circle highlighted in green over there to the right. Right now, we are $3.1 million ahead of our budgeted schedule in terms of how quickly we're bringing in revenue. When that's compared to our historical revenues, we are right on track at 67%. It's kind of right there within the margins of the last 4 years, so we really don't have any concerns with our revenue at this time. Ms. Palmer, if you scroll on down to the schedule of expenditures. Just a reminder that the top half of this document compares actual operational expenditures to what we expect per monthly budget. The second half of the document is looking at salaries and benefits and comparing the actual expenditures per period to what we anticipate by month. And the important figure there is also highlighted in green and circled in red. We are $1.3 million under what we anticipated spending for our monthly budget through period 6. When you look at our percentage of expenditures compared to budget for this period in FY23 compared to the last 4 years, we are out ahead. But just keep in mind, we are still under our monthly budget there by $1.3 million. Ms. Palmer, you can scroll ahead. And here's the final document, which is our balance sheet and our fund balance projection. Total assets is $100.7 million with $64,000 in liabilities. That gives us a fund balance per balance sheet of $100.6 million. That represents 53.2% of our annual expenditures. That exceeds where we anticipated being. So if you look at the orange line there, we anticipated being at 50.9%. We were actually at 53.2%, and that's just made up of bringing in the revenue a little bit quicker and spending a little bit slower. And so that difference there is at $4.4 million. While reviewing this, I actually included the PDF of period 5. So in tomorrow morning's update for the board, I have the actual expenditures for both legal services as well as the board's budget. Compared to budget, I've included that in tomorrow's update for you. And I'd just like to touch on what Dr. Anderson was saying about looking ahead for next year, what possible professional development or conferences that you might go to. We'd really appreciate if you try to peg down, look at your schedule, and let Ms. Palmer know which ones you actually anticipate going to. We always have some flexibility if there ends up being 1 or 2 that you may not have planned for, or if you planned for them and didn't end up going. But what we don't want to see is budgeting for every single possibility for every single board member, because we'll inevitably budget over what we need to. And then the remaining reports, if you scroll on down, Ms. Palmer, is our monthly invoices that are paid that exceed $10,000. So they're in that range of $10,000 to $50,000 range. It's just a listing of those expenditures paid during the month of December. And then finally, we have our Senate Bill 68 report, which just has all of our funds, our total revenues and expenses compared to budget for every single one of our funds that we have here at Ccsd. So I'll pause there if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schoeneman. We'll move forward to our policies to be adopted, rescinded, revised, or reviewed. Is there any follow-up discussion, questions? Mr. Denson, did I see your hand?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I sent out an email kind of after reviewing these and looking them over. Let me see if I can pull it back up. On the sex education one, I'm fine with that one moving forward as staff recommended. On the other one, on the JE1 discrimination complaints, I did send out a document with us, just a few changes that I'd recommend. One was just including more protected traits that brings this in line with the non-discrimination policies that the University of Georgia has and ACC, adding in gender identity, veteran status, familial status, and a few other things there. Some of those which are already included with the JAA, the student discrimination policy we have, so I think they'll kind of come in line a little bit. So I made that recommendation, and then the other, I think, major change I recommended was extending the allowed reporting period from what is currently just 30 days now to 90 days. And looking into this, the EEOC actually allows up to 180 days for complaints for them. And I thought just that would be better for us to do whenever we're talking about potential discrimination, something that could be extremely triggering to individuals and difficult for them to deal with, that it might take some time, more than 30 days, for them to feel comfortable coming forward and discussing that with their coworkers. And so extending that. And I did recommend just removing some of the language that I thought was a little bit oddly specific there, but I know the Attorney Pruitt pointed out that it was just there to be kind of safe with some language from a former precedent. So I'm fine if that needs to stay. And then the last thing is just fixing a few Scrivener's errors that were in there. Yeah.
I looked over the recommended changes to that policy, and I don't have a problem with any of them, but I would like to keep that inclusive language. I think the notion of extending the time to report 90 days is good, but I do think there is some veracity there with saying, the longer you wait, the investigation can be affected by memories fading, witnesses move away. So I think that's a very important part of the policy, and I will ask that we keep the 90-day recommendation, but also keep that other language there.
Do we need the 30 days specificity of when a person delays, or just have it say when a victim delays?
This is something that I would actually defer to HR. If there is a timeline that you see where what you need to have a really thorough investigation starts to dwindle, I would put that in there so that if someone is hesitant about coming forward or there is trauma associated with it, they at least know we can support you and give you a longer time, but this may affect how thoroughly we are able to review it. So I would defer to HR to see if there is a magic number there based on your experience that you would give that to us.
We'll certainly take a look at that.
Any further discussion or questions?
I would just say on that, I'm definitely happy having the other language included on there. I think I would push pretty strongly for us to have it stretched out to 90 days, especially since so many other entities find that it's easily doable to do within 90 days. And I do understand that for HR's principles, it probably is easier for 30 days. I think for an individual experiencing discrimination and having to come forward, honestly, I'd like it to be longer, but I would think 90 days is something that would benefit them, and I would hope that our staff could find a way to deal with. Yeah.
I just have a quick question, and it just came to me. With the Equal Opportunity Coordinator, That is typically like assigned, right? Like that's assigned to, like, it's like an additional, I feel like we had a description at some point, but it's assigned to a person that already has, okay. And so there's not it's not like a committee, it's the only time it's someone different is like if that person designates somebody to be different, right? Where it says, or designee, like the EO coordinator or their designee.
Yes, and the superintendent appoints who that person is.
Okay, okay. And then with, right, as it stands right now, we don't have what is the checks and balances for the EO coordinator? Like who is making sure that the EO, the Equal Opportunity Coordinator, is investigating, things thoroughly or within the 30 days or whatever it becomes, the 90 days, like that type of thing. Like, I'm just curious, like what happens after this, like who does a person go to if they get a finding or it's a finding they don't agree with, or, they feel that they need to like appeal or.
Right, there's a process in the policy for that, and they can appeal, I think there's a couple of steps, but up through the superintendent.
Okay. And so there is an opportunity to appeal to someone else, but as it stands, we have that one EO, Equal Opportunity Coordinator, and that's it. There's no.
We have one EO coordinator, and then their processes are monitored by myself and by the superintendent.
Okay. All right, any additional feedback or questions? Okay, we'll move forward to item 11. Any additional? All right, we are at item 12, and these are our items for consideration for the consent agenda. Do we want to remove any of these from the consent agenda? Mr. Denson, and then Ms. Davis.
I would like to remove from consent items 5 and 6.
Okay, so we're pulling 5 and 6. And before we go to Ms. Davis, are there specific questions that you have or concerns that you have right now that you can share, or perhaps that can be answered or that the district can prepare?
Sure. On 5, it is more along questions on. I was curious if we already had propane buses, and if so, how many at this time, and if this was going to require us to gain any new propane fueling infrastructure necessary. And then the other question is, just wondering why we chose propane instead of exploring the electric option that was part of this grant.
So to your point about infrastructure, it's cost prohibitive at this point for us to move to electric. So propane is probably the most economically feasible option that we have. And yearly we purchase buses, and so this is just a part of that. It's a combination of funds that we're using, some grant funding, some SPOS funding that we're using to purchase the buses.
And built on that, have we looked into, and if, you can get these answers to me later if you need to, but do we have a possible transition plan or such in place? Because I understand it's always going to be cost prohibitive until we actually start going. At the beginning, it's always going to be cost prohibitive for us to be able to transition to electric from propane or diesel. But do we have a plan in place for us to do so? Because that is obviously the direction, the future of where everything is going, with ACC and UGA now transitioning their fleets to all electric. I'm wondering if we have a plan in place for that.
Not at this time. That's something we could study further. I can tell you many school districts across the state have backed away from it. There's only a few that are participating in fully electric fleets. But it's something we could study.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions about items 6? Mr. Denson, you wanted to remove that
Yes.
one as well?
Thank you. Yeah, for 6, it is, so looking over the respondents to the RFP, I was curious on what reasoning Grawl was chosen over Hollinsworth when Hollinsworth came in $250,000 cheaper, only 75% of what
Yes,
Grawl was at.
Mr. Gilbert will come forth and answer that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Good evening. We actually interviewed the 2 low bidders, and so we asked for them to give us a bid breakdown of their proposal to determine why there was, $300,000 difference. And the low bidder was actually using a vendor out of Florida, a kitchen vendor that they'd never used before, and they were $100,000 cheaper. So that was a big chunk of the money right there. And then also, there were some scope changes, or scope items that were missed per the low guy, where he was substantially lower on several line items. So in looking at their project team, their estimate, using an out-of-town kitchen vendor, they didn't score as high when we were evaluating their proposal.
So the idea with the out-of-town kitchen provider, the out-of-state kitchen provider was just because they were out of state, or because
Well, they had never used them before on a project.
Yeah.
So, I'm kind of hesitant when you're putting together a team that basically has a 2-month construction window, and you have to get done, and you're using a vendor that you've never used before, and that vendor requires a 90% deposit before they'll even do the shop drawings for the project. And we won't fund deposits, and I think there was some concern on the contractor's part of him maybe having to take a loan out to make that deposit for the equipment. And again, that's just not a really healthy recipe for a project that we've got to get done in 2 months, and kind of taking a gamble on that to save, let's save the money.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Davis, there was...
Yes, thank you. So I know that a lot of the culinary project at the Career Academy was pretty much designed by Chef Stone, as I understand it, right?
He gave us a lot of input. The architect actually has a kitchen consultant on their staff. So he was kind of in step with Chef Manny to say, okay, this is like using a commercial kitchen. We weren't specifically designing, we're going to be doing pastries, and that's all we're doing. So we were pigeonholed by the equipment that was selected or the layout that was done. So it's pretty much, it was working with the architect's kitchen consultant to develop the space and the different type of equipment to go in there so that the students would be able to work in any restaurant in Athens afterwards.
Has the board seen any of those designs for this?
I think we made an initial presentation. I can bring something back to you to show you that.
That would be ideal.
Yeah, because there's a small restaurant space that, Chef Manning was looking to try to have the students prepare. And also there's individual prep stations. So we can do a small presentation and I can forward you a layout and then do a presentation if there's any questions or to be asked.
So this is being driven by the staff at the Career Academy, right?
Yes.
And so I'm concerned because I've heard from some of the people that helped design the current Career Academy with the loss of the Yellow Jacket Cafe, and now it's the Buzz Cafe, and I'm concerned about the artifacts that are there representing a period of our history and the history of that school. Is that going to be maintained in this new design?
Yes, we're not touching the Buzz Cafe or the Yellow Jacket Cafe, that area. Everything's within the existing kitchen footprint and the dining space buffet area that you had before. So it's all contained within that.
So will that, I guess I can wait for the drawing, but will there, because I really love that space, I like it separately, but I've always wanted it to connect. Is it going to be still the same way so that they're completely separate from each other?
Yeah, for safety and security, we're going to have the doors all stay the same. So you'll enter from the vestibule into the restaurant area. You'll still have the double doors that'll take you into the atrium if necessary, But we can lock those so that from a safety, security standpoint, you won't have public, intermingling with students in the atrium and such.
Okay, can't
Yep.
wait to see that design. Thank you so
Yep,
much.
I'll forward that.
This is completely unrelated, but I saw in the legislative sessions that they're proposing to give grants to schools who initiate construction curricula for like heavy equipment and such. So I'm curious to see at some point in the future if we go after that money as well.
Well, I think the Career Academy is looking at the construction pathway, and there's HVAC, electrical, carpentry, things like that. I don't know if yours is specifically talking about, heavy site grading equipment, Caterpillar, things like that. So that would be, and I think our welding, some of the welding students actually get jobs at Caterpillar because of their ability to weld on different machines and things. They come out certified to do that, so.
And so to be clear, we have items 5 and 6. Are there any other items we want to pull off of consent? Mr. Denson, do you feel comfortable leaving it on consent, or do you still want to pull it off and vote on it separately? These two items.
I feel comfortable putting 6 back on. I'd like to leave 5 off, maybe submitting some more questions on email and just be able to have a little more discussion on it.
All right. So we've moved 5. Ms. Davis?
Yes, I have a question about the opportunity cultural planning design work approval. I read that. I was very excited about that, by the way. I really like that. That's a great direction to go in. I've got some really big questions about how big can we go with it. But the specific thing was I believe it's in this cluster, in section 6, under the independent contractor, the third sentence. Is that written correctly? That's not you, John. This is the opportunity culture planning design.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you.
And if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Davis, this information was shared on November the 4th in our board update with all of the questions that you're asking now. If you look on your board update on November the 4th, I believe I'm correct, and we shared that, gave an overview of all of the information that you're asking now.
For the opportunity cluster?
Yes, it was in
No,
your
it's
board
just
update.
a question, it's one word that looks like it's negating the sentence. So if somebody will just take a look at what they sent to us today, that third sentence in the first paragraph under section 6.
Ms. Davis, are you referring to the contract?
Yes.
Okay, we'll take a look at that. In fact, I think Attorney Pruitt had given us some revisions, and we're in the process of getting those minor edits made, nothing substantial to the contract, just some of those
just
kind of,
that.
yeah,
It
yeah.
negated the sentence. It
There's
was
a double negative.
in the sentence,
Absolutely,
that's
yes.
all.
We'll get that corrected.
Thank you.
Okay, so currently I have items 5 and 4 removed. No? Okay, so the minor corrections, so that's just item 5, correct? All right. That is it. We are
So move that we adjourn.
okay. Oh, hold on one second, Ms. Palmer.
Can I just make sure everyone puts questions in the question documents so that so we can answer them and everyone sees, the question and the answer?
Does everyone know where that
Do we
question
put questions in that document, or do we send questions to you?
I made it so you can edit it, so you can put your question in there.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
I thought I got an email.
Yep. Lisa, Ms. Palmer sent it out to us, I think, a couple of weeks. Yeah. But yeah, we can put our questions in there and just give Ms. Palmer a heads up that you've added a new question.
Share it every time the work session agenda.
Okay, thank you. Hey, we are at item 13.
I move that we adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Hull, a second by Ms. Davis. Was that a second? No, a second. Okay. We are adjourned at 9:56 p.m. Thank you. Have a good evening.